believe the company.
This company.
You're going to bankrupt your mama's company?
At least I have the radio to keep me company.
On 93.5 and 107.5, The Fan.
Off and running here on what is today, Jimmy? Hump Day Wednesday?
It is Hump Day Wednesday.
Hump Day Wednesday on The Fan. Jake Query along with Jimmy Cook, Eddie Garrison here as well. We got a good show lined up, actually. And yesterday, I felt good about it because I was in this great mood because we walked out of here yesterday, and I just felt good as Santa Jake, right?
Yeah, it's a great feeling.
Helping deliver Christmas miracles to sports fans across central Indiana.
Haven't you just taken the list, though? You still got to check it twice and figure out which ones are going to pass? Like, there's
who's naughty and who's nice?
Been no delivering just yet, right? Just acceptance of the requests.
That's correct. I have not actually. Well, I got to load everything up.
Correct. It's not Christmas
yet.
It's
not supposed to be foggy, right? Now, here's the question: if they still use Rudolph, even if it's not foggy, right? Because it's still nighttime.
Correct.
Okay.
You don't take the lights off your car just because it's clear skies, right?
Yeah,
you still need them just in case.
That's a good point. Although the fog lights and the headlights are two totally different animals.
Right.
Two totally different things, right?
You think Rudolph has two settings? You hit the high beams, or you
probably
there's multiple options there for him?
He might. That's a good question, actually. That's a really good question. We've got a lot to talk about, including Indiana last night, Jimmy. Listen, now you're laughing. Now, why are you laughing?
Because they got the win at the end of the day, right? And you talk about the ramifications of a loss to Morehead State on your home floor with an unknown ceiling for what the Hoosiers can be this year. And they were talking about it on the telecast last night. Bruce Weber highlighted it. We're going to talk to him top of the 2 o'clock hour. But that's a tough loss to have. And they didn't lose. To clarify, they won. But that would have been a tough loss to have on your resume come Selection Sunday. And I'm not going to sit here and fully be disgruntled or upset about a win, but the fact that it took, a 20-6 run over the final 9 minutes to get it done, you're walking a very, very tight rope.
Here's what concerns me for Indiana.
Sure. Also, the fact they couldn't get up for that game bothered me, that it took.
And I'll admittedly, I talked to people yesterday after the game, so this is kind of a scouting from various areas. But here's what Indiana did against Kansas, okay? So Indiana's offense typically is that they have a guard or a wing player that comes in and basically Khalil Weir is their focal point of their offense, right? Or Malik Renew, one of those two. So they go into one of them, and then they have somebody flash in from the wing, and they do either, essentially a handoff or a dish off. And if the defender comes over and helps, you dish back to Khalil Weir or Malik Renew, easy basket. If the defender says, okay, I'm not going to help, I'm going to stay with my man, then that is allowing for whoever the flasher is to get an easy basket. This was how they took advantage with Galloway against Kansas.
All the time you saw Galloway with those type of cuts.
So Kansas basically said, we're going to let your guards have that. We feel that it is in our better interest to stay with Khalil Weir or Renew and let your guards have their shots, okay? Well, because that worked against Kansas, because Kansas just surrendered that and let Galloway get his 28, because that worked against Kansas, they did the same thing last night against Morehead State. They ran basically the exact same stuff. And Morehead State said, you know what? We're not going to let that happen. We'll double over, and we'll cut that off in the lane, and then if need be, we will corner or trap the big. If it goes back to that, we have the length and the athleticism to go over and try to play both sides of it. And what worries me for Indiana is they just kind of stuck with it. They didn't seem to have – George Hill once told me that for the Pacers, and I found this fascinating, that a big problem – that Pacers team that had George Hill and David West and Lance Stevenson and Paul George, and I think a lot of what happened with that team and where things broke down was each play that the Pacers would have, they'd call out a play. Triangle gold. Everybody on the floor knows that triangle gold has an automatic alternate play, okay? And if triangle gold, the first entry pass is supposed to go to David West. If it goes to anyone but David West, that means that the alternate play becomes immediately active. So instead of triangle gold, you're going to blue circle. So it goes into David West, and everybody's like, okay, now we're running blue circle because triangle gold they took away, and he didn't go to David West, so we're running blue circle. And Lance Stevenson was the one that would shy away from that, and it just created all kinds of havoc over the course of time when they were playing in that.
Seems unlikely.
Okay. For Indiana last night, the thing that was frustrating was they never seemingly went away from – they never went to an alternate play. They stayed with, no, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to stick with it. And they didn't make the necessary adjustments. Now, in the end, it obviously paid off for them because they had the big run at the end, and they end up winning the game.
They played perfect at the end.
They played perfect at the end.
Which is the margin for error that at times feels present with this team. They shot 18% from beyond the arc. Mike Woodson acknowledged it post-game that they got enough stops to win, and that's really all that matters. You were able to erase what was a nightmarish night from start to about 9 minutes left to go in the game, and now it's a learning session instead of a learning session after a loss. The bigger issue for me, to your point, Jake, about whether it was lack of adjustments or whether it was sticking with something, they looked flat. Assembly Hall felt flat last night, and a large part of it was whichever five were on the floor for a half and change of that ball game. Now that said, there is still areas in growth for them to learn and improve from this, but we already know what they are as a three-point shooting team. And we know that if you're not going to either take a high volume of threes or make a high volume of threes, you have to play near perfect basketball everywhere else. That's hard to sustain for 48 minutes, but they were able to get 9.5 of it, which it was a 20-4 run, by the way, to close that game. So the defense did get better, but it's like it shouldn't take Kansas coming into Assembly Hall to get 40 minutes of clean basketball.
Now, the other big story that happened yesterday before the Indiana game, and Nick Cross is going to join us from the Colts here in just a couple of minutes, but the Colts yesterday finding out they're going to be down the home stretch without two guys, Jimmy.
Yeah, Isaiah McKenzie and Tony Brown, 3 games for conduct detrimental to the team. That was not imposed by the NFL. That was done by the Colts, and that will sideline both players to the end of the regular season.
Now, here's my question. There are 2 ways to look at this, okay? And I'll admit, yesterday I was Santa Jake, today I'll be the Grinch, okay? I know that the narrative is going to be, see, this is what's fabulous about the Colts. They hold players accountable. They hold players accountable. If you're not living up to expectation, Shaq Leonard, they'll release you. This sends a message to the locker room, and it shows, it's all about culture. It's about being a leader of men. I love this franchise because they bring in character guys. Then the other side of it is this, Jimmy. How many players have we seen so far this year for the Colts that have had to miss games for something other than health reasons?
Well, this is now 4? 5? Who am I missing?
You've got Chris Lamont.
That's who I'm missing.
Al-Qadi Muhammad, Grover Stewart, and the 2 from yesterday.
Okay, all right, there we go.
And then they just signed somebody that still owes the league, if he's on the active roster, a 4-game suspension.
Jared Veldier.
So my question is this, 2 ways to look at it. One is, I love that this is a franchise that holds people accountable. The other is, why is it a franchise, if it touts itself as a franchise where character matters, why are they bringing in characters where this becomes an issue for the second time in 3 years and towards the end of the year, where when the games are the most critical, where everybody's not fully in? How has that happened? I get it. I mean, over the course of 52 players and then 60 plus with all things, I get it. But I also think that there is mixed messaging between the reality and the branding.
On the one hand, I want to say, well, I mean, Isaiah McKenzie, Tony Brown, they've been primarily backups or special teamers this year. But at the same time, this isn't happening everywhere else around the league.
McKenzie's a pretty important special teams player, though.
Correct. I'm not trying to.
And Brown plays a position where they need all the depth they can get.
They have certainly been useful bodies, useful players at times over the course of the season. But going in, you're looking at them not necessarily as star players. All that said, Jake, I mean, you're right. It points to a larger issue of you're not seeing these type of suspensions stack up around the league.
Right.
It's happening
Well,
here.
And to be fair, though, we're also not paying as specific esoteric attention to the daily happenings of the Denver Broncos. You know what I mean?
Right.
Joining us now on the guest line, a guy that Had his first career interception against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was a third-round pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. Nick Cross, the safety for the Colts, joins us. Nick, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
You know what? I can't complain, man. I mean, here's the thing. And I used to be a guy, Nick, that would look at things like, you know, the pessimistic side of things, right? But it's Christmas week, right? It's Christmas week. We're heading down the home. For you personally, you got to be thinking to yourself, okay, it's Christmas week, but here you are down the home stretch, and you guys have the division within sight now. You've put yourself in that position. Take me through just kind of the overall mindset or energy that comes with that.
No, it's definitely exciting. It's definitely exciting to know that, you're in control of your own destiny. But at the end of the day, you just take it one day at a time, 1 week at a time, and just, you know what's ahead of us. But at the end of the day, you just got to make sure you take one step and put one foot in front of the other, and everything will take care of itself.
It has been. Let's go back to this, and I want to kind of tag team it with how it might be helping the mindset from a team standpoint right now. But for you, Nick Cross, when you were drafted to the Colts, I remember we had your college coach on, and the discussion was, you were an incredible athlete, that you were still probably going to have to kind of learn and feel your way through the position at the NFL level, but you had the athleticism to be instinctive at your position. And you've kind of had to wait your time, truth be told, right, for the reps to come your way and then make the most of them. How difficult was that process to learn and have to rely on that patience while at the same time knowing that you had to be ready?
It's just, it can be difficult at times. The skill set that you have, and that everybody wants what they want now, and it's definitely a good thing. I always say that everybody's plan is different. God has a different plan for everybody. And at the end of the day, his was to just teach me patience throughout the whole process. Teach me consistency, teach me just to continue to put in the work, even if the results weren't showing automatically or they weren't showing when I wanted them to. So it's just, to teach, just consistency, patience, and, I feel like I grew a lot in those areas over this past year. And it's definitely, formed me into a better player, a better man, and just overall a better person.
Colts safety Nick Cross, nice enough to take some time with us. Nick, how has Gus Bradley been influential in your development / through all the ups and downs and the growth and the fight that you've had to go through to be able to be in this position?
He's been very, very influential. Someone who will always talk to me, always very encouraging, always trying to help me improve, in the places I can improve, just, whether it's a little story here, a little story there, or, just an encouraging word here, an encouraging word there. Or, sometimes he just, call me into his office and we'll sit down and talk about, life and, not even really football. But he's been someone who's always been there. Him, Coach Milo, Coach Mike Mitch, are guys who always, no matter what's been going on, just say, keep grinding, keep working, your time's going to come. Just make sure you're prepared when it comes.
Is there a singular moment you can point to besides the interception where things really started to click for you, or where you felt like maybe you turned a corner this year?
I'll probably go back to training camp. Just being out there taking all the reps. At strong, at free, at nickel, and just having to go out there and perform at a high level every day. Just trying to be the most consistent out there, and I definitely felt my game take a certain jump. Just being out there and just having to be able to communicate at a high level to all the positions. And I talked to Gus at the end of training camp. He was like, "Look, you're night and day from where you were last year," and that's kind of where I felt that okay, like I can do this. I can do this at a high level, and now it's just continuing to put in the work and to put in the time to be able to make sure I'm prepared when the time comes.
Nick, there are a lot of guys on the roster. Nick Cross of the Colts joins us. There are a lot of guys on the roster that have kind of gone through a process similar to yourself where, they kind of had to wait till their number was called. Does that benefit this installment of the Colts this year in the fact of now you're at a point where you can't look too far ahead and you've got to go 1 week at a time? It's more critical now probably than ever with this last stretch. Does it benefit you to have a locker room full of guys that have had to take things in their career 1 week at a time?
I think it definitely does. I think it's, it's part of the identity of the team. Just, a team that's, resilient, a team that fights through adversity. A team that's not going to let, one thing or another stop them from getting to where we need to get to. At the end of the day, our team has been formed through adversity, and it's one of those things that either makes you or breaks you, and it, it definitely reveals who you are. And I feel like throughout the year it's revealed that, we're a tough team, a competitive team. And at the end of the day, we don't rest until we get the result we need. So it's definitely good to be able to have that at this point in the season.
How big a detriment or distraction is it to have personnel issues taking place away from the field that takes guys away?
We try not to focus on that stuff. Just focus on the task at hand, which is going out there every day, working hard, studying in meetings, watching the film, going on the practice field, taking care of our body, and ultimately just going out there and trying to win on Sundays.
You went to DeMatha High School, right?
Yes, sir.
Which is probably, let's be honest, Nick Cross, if you're talking about high school athletics in the United States, it's got to be like top 5. I mean, the number of players and David Aldridge, who we just had on the show, went there. Jarrod Mustaf went there. I mean, it's endless. Like the number of players that have come through that school. Victor Oladipo went through there, for that matter. Was it a benefit to you to come through a high school program where a lot of the guys in the NFL have been the guy their entire high school and college career, and they're the greatest athlete in the history of their high school? With all due respect, you're one of many, many great athletes that came through your high school. How much did that instill in you, kind of the initiative or the underdog nature that has carried you to this point?
It definitely was good for me to go somewhere like that. You see all the great players. Excuse me. You see all the great players who go ahead of you. The Josh Wilsons, the Victor Oladipo, the Markell, the Chase. All those guys who've gone before you. And it's just motivation to go out there and do it for yourself, as well as the guys who come before you. They sacrificed, they paved the way so that we can have the opportunities we have. So it's definitely fun to be able to see them, when they come to the building, when they came back to the school. And it just gave that added motivation to be like, okay, they were in my shoes not too long ago. So what's the difference between them making it and me being able to make it? So it just, was something that pushed me every day in order to be able to just be the best I can be.
Who paves the way for you in the Colts locker room? Who's the guy that, so long as they are there, and by the way, are you feeling okay? You don't have you're not going to be on the injury list with a cough and cold, are you?
No. One of my teammates made me laugh.
Okay, I want to make sure. No, who's the guy in the locker room that just kind of gives you? We all have this within the workplace where like when they're there, you just feel like everything's going to be okay. Who's that guiding force for you?
I would probably say, I'll probably go back to last year. He was here last year. Stephon Gilmore, one of the first guys that took me in and, took me under his wing, someone I still talk to this day. And then on top of that, I would probably say, DeForest Buckner, Taquan, the group of the D linemen who I always hang around. They're definitely there all the time, just, showing their consistency in practice and the way they prepare and everything. And, just great guys to be around, guys that, I hang out with every day on the field, off the field, in the locker room, out the locker room. So they're definitely there, always encouraging, always, uplifting and, always trying to challenge me to be the best I can be every day.
Colts safety Nick Cross is our guest. Nick, for those that say, well, the defense, the team as a whole is only playing this great because of the schedule and the teams they're playing against, what do you say to them to show that, no, when the playoffs start, we're going to be this same team? It doesn't matter who's on the schedule.
I feel like, we just got to show it in the work we put in. We try to go 1-0 every week, 1-0 every day, just, go out there and execute and destroy everything in our path, practice, meetings, walk through, just go out there, dominate those things, and it'll all translate to Sunday. So, I'm not too worried about, what the naysayers say and everything. We just go out there. Every week is the same process, win, lose, or draw, no matter who the opponent is, and we just go out there and try to compete at a high level and ultimately win the football game.
Nick, lastly, Atlanta, I think we now know that it's probably going to be Taylor Heinicke that is quarterbacking for them. Desmond Ridder obviously has taken a lot of their snaps. That's kind of gone back and forth. How difficult is it to game plan for a team when you're not 100% certain who the quarterback's going to be?
It can provide its difficulties, but at the end of the day, we played Taylor last year when he was with the Commanders, and we have a lot of film on Desmond. So it's just like I said, we go out there, for whoever's out there, we prepare, we watch the film. We are in tune with our assignments and what the defensive coaches have planned for us for this game, and just got to go out there and execute at a high level.
Are you like Giannis? Did you get to keep the football from your first interception? Did you go in the visiting locker room, make sure you got it for the mantle?
Oh no, yeah, the football is sitting in my house right now. So.
There we go. That's
yeah.
what I like to hear. All right. Well, hey, Nick, we appreciate it. Best of luck, obviously, against the Atlanta Falcons and down the home stretch here as you guys try to lock in a postseason berth and potentially an AFC South title. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
All right, Nick Cross, again, from the Indianapolis Colts. The one area of concern in that for me would be simply, Jimmy, the fact that if Stephon Gilmore is the guy that gives him like a comfort feeling being in the locker room, problem is he's not there anymore, right?
Yeah.
I get what he's saying.
It's a good thing there's cell phones, Jake.
What's that?
It's a good thing there's cell phones.
Yeah, but you know what? When you're out on the field, it's awfully hard to make a phone call.
That's
right?
true. You got Kenny Moore, though.
I mean, well, exactly, which is not the answer he gave.
I know.
That's my point. So, that honestly, I mean, I think that, and I get what he's saying. I mean, Stephon Gilmore offered him a leadership,
sure,
and that's part of why Stephon Gilmore probably was here.
It speaks volumes to the work that Nick's put in this year, though, if that was such a big, I don't want to say cushion for him necessarily, but Gilmore's, like you mentioned, been gone, and yet he's still been able to fight through the adversity. And
I think what
here.
we see with Cross is this, and I think that you see this with, I'm trying to think of other players. To be honest with you, it's almost like the reverse psychology with Shaq Leonard. And by that I mean, Nick Cross is a guy that when he was drafted in, the Colts made no bones about the fact, nor did I think Nick Cross was aware of the fact that he was drafted for his raw athleticism. TJ Green is another guy that falls into this exact same category at the safety position, played corner in college, did Green, and because he could collapse, his speed to get to a spot on instinct was such that they took the gamble that it would be able to pay off and that instinctively he would learn the safety position. It never panned out for him here, and that's why he didn't make it to, I don't think, a second contract. Now, with Nick Cross, he is a guy that the Colts openly admitted they might have drafted a little too early, and by that I mean maybe they could have gotten him in like 5. I think they traded up to get to him, but they loved his athleticism to be able to instinctively get to where the football is, even though the position was not natural just yet. And but what I mean by that when I say instinctively, I mean when a play, in other words, if the football's going to his right, he has the athleticism to wait till the ball's going that way and then instinctively react to where the ball's going,
sure,
whereas other players have a natural football instinct to know the football's going to the right before it even goes there. And I think he's had to learn through because he was so reliant on his athleticism for so long. And now he's learned the actual game, the viewing and the unfolding of the play to be able to put it together for himself, because before that he didn't have to necessarily learn those things. The opposite happened with Shaq Leonard, because Shaq Leonard is a guy that his speed was so good that he didn't necessarily have to learn that area. And then once his athleticism went away to where he had to rely on fundamental and on X's and O's, not that Shaq Leonard was totally void of that ability to do that. I'm not saying that. But he had never had to do it before because he was so much faster than everybody else. He could be reactionary. So if you are a reactionary player, then what Nick Cross has done, I think, is he was drafted because in college he was a reactionary player. But before he really went out there to rely on his reactionary skills, he learned preemptive skills. And now you're starting to see that all come together for him, which is why he is getting on the field more. So,
right.
And it is a real positive sign for them if he can continue in that right trajectory, because of the fact that that is a position. Whenever you're talking about the defensive backfield, you're talking about consistent rotation of player. I mean, there's always going to be, I've always said 1,000 times, you've heard me say it, offensive line and defensive back, cell phone chargers and sunglasses. You can never have too many. You can never have too many, because as soon as you have one, you're like, man, this thing's great. It either all of a sudden just one day it loses its power, or you forget where it is and you turn around and it's broken, right?
Yeah.
And so to have that depth at that position is important. Now, in terms of the situation with Isaiah McKenzie and Tony Brown, kind of a different scenario. And we'll talk about exactly that and what's going on with the Colts in that regard on the other side. Kurt Cignetti, 1 o'clock. Bruce Weber, 2 o'clock on a Wednesday here. Aquarium Company, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.
We're the Hellsberg Wedding Band, and this is
So, again, Jimmy Cook, and thank you to Nick Cross for his time. I'm a little concerned, by the way, that has he been hanging out with you guys?
Him and Eddie, I think, got lunch the other day.
Okay, stop.
How's the cough and cold, Eddie?
I feel perfectly fine. Monday was the worst.
Okay. Jimmy, yours?
Stuffy and a little bit of a sore throat.
Uh-oh. Staying over here, man.
See, I never had the sore throat.
Like I said to you guys.
You're right. Symptoms can't evolve. They'll vary from person to person.
And you're just coming off an airplane overseas. If I get sick for Christmas time, there's going to be hell to pay for you guys.
I know nobody's a doctor, right, in this room. But what is the grace period in terms of, okay, you're back, it's definitely not from the trip?
That's a good question.
Usually it takes
4 days?
4 days?
Yeah.
I was about to say, usually it takes 48 to 72 hours to develop symptoms of.
Monday would have been cut off, but I still like playing Eddie, or blaming Eddie.
But Monday, you were back. You were feeling sick, right?
Correct.
Yeah. See?
No. Tuesday.
Okay.
It was fine Monday, felt it Tuesday.
Well, I'm moving a little bit further over here. The Colts, I will admit, I was a cynic yesterday when I saw the suspension because I don't know which way to go with it. I don't know whether to I can tell you where I want to go with it, okay? I know that it's probably my job, and it's what people want to hear, to come on here and say, see, this is wonderful. I love the fact that Tony Brown and Isaiah McKenzie did something detrimental to the team, and whether it was the two of them were in tandem and they were like the two rogue things that stayed out late and missed bed check, but I know that the narrative that I should go with is this is an example of why I love this franchise, and I love how it starts at the top with accountability and responsibility and sending messages. And that's fine. And I'm cool with that, except for this. I cannot, nor do I think anybody should, from December until May, talk about how the reason that I love this franchise is because they have an accountability and they bring in character matters, and you have to be a horseshoe guy that's for the horseshoe. You can't say that from December to May if then between August and December you're walking like a clown shoed wearing guy on landmines of wondering when the next roster spot all of a sudden is going to open up in the most critical point of the year because guys are being suspended. If you bring in character guys, then that shouldn't be an issue. You shouldn't have to do in-season accountability if you're bringing in guys that are horseshoe guys that are bought in from the get-go. Period. So you can't preach both. But having that, all that being said, I do understand, quite frankly, I do understand the fact that when you have that many players, I mean, it's virtually impossible to constantly, all the time be in control and babysitting, if you will, players all the time. These are adults. And secondly, Chris Ballard, in his defense, has been open about the fact that he is willing to take flyers in some areas if he feels that he has a locker room that is strong enough to put those guys on the right course. Obviously, in this case, he didn't feel that he has a locker room strong enough to put Isaiah McKenzie and Tony Brown on the right course, or if he does, they didn't do it in quick enough fashion because those two guys are now out during the most critical period of the year. And listen, it's a whole different talk show. It's a whole different retroactive conversation about the vaccines and testing positive and all this. I get it. But in reality, the thing that cooked Carson Wentz's goose in this town was essentially when he said that he wanted to do what was best for he and his family. His right, absolutely. I get it about the vaccine. I don't want to get into that area because it's thank goodness, a conversation from another year. But by all account, it appeared as though of all people at the very top, Jim Irsay said, look, if you're going to do it this way and the league has agreed to and the Players Association has agreed to certain rules, on what happens if you have chosen not to be vaccinated. That's totally fine. That is totally your choice. Totally fine. No problem with that. But there are different processes for people that are not versus people that are. And so as a result of that, when Carson Wentz did test positive towards the end of the year, even though they ended up changing the rule at the very end of the time period, Carson Wentz was not able to be around the team because he had agreed to the fact that that would be the risk he was running. And that risk, whether it was just or unjust, valid or invalid, I totally understand people's perspective on that. I respect it. But the reality is there was a rule in place that he, by his own free will, chose to run the risk of, and that ended up going against him. The ruling went against him, and that hurt him, and it hurt his football team in its most critical periods. Carson Wentz is absolutely a more important part of the Indianapolis Colts in the year that he was playing here than Isaiah McKenzie and Tony Brown are to this one. But the reality is that you are now in the most critical home stretch of your season with a division in sight, trying to close in on that. Isaiah McKenzie is an important special teams player, and at a position especially, and I'm not saying that this is where that he is the guy that would be making this difference up, but if Michael Pittman Jr. is not able to go, for example, which I don't think that's going to be the case, but we shall see, he does provide receiver depth. Tony Brown plays a position that has been a turnstile for the Colts that you always need, and he has not been great when he played.
No, he's been that turnstile at times,
correct.
Right?
He was the turnstile, yes. But that's the area where he provides at least a body, and my point being this, down the home stretch when it is most important to have everybody to a man totally honed in, yes, give Colts credit that they went ahead and ridded themselves of 2 viruses that were running through the locker room. Their words, not mine, because they said they had conduct that was detrimental to the team. So they got rid of them.
Oh.
Kudos to that, right?
Got rid of him for 3 games, right? We'll see what happens
for the rest
if they
of the
make
season,
playoffs.
essentially, right?
Well, I mean,
McKenzie's on a 1-year deal, so.
Right, I understand that, but they didn't say the whole year. Like, if they make the playoffs, are they done, or are they bringing them back? Like,
for the regular season, they're done.
Correct.
I mean, it's not even like they're guys that are contributing weekly. I mean, McKenzie gets like 10 snaps a game, and Tony Brown just plays special teams.
It doesn't matter.
I'm not disagreeing with their value. I'm saying, like, it's hard for me to go to the leap and say, yes, they rid themselves of it when
the bottom line is this.
Happens.
There's 3 games left in the regular season, and you're dealing with the fact that 2 guys that are in your locker room, in your rooms all the time, for whatever reason, had conduct that was detrimental to the team enough that you wanted to send them out to pasture for the remainder of the season. That is a real negative with 3 games to go. There's no positive you can put on it, and it speaks to an area where, yes, one half of you can say kudos to them for running a culture that held them accountable. The other is, why would they have a culture where that becomes an issue at the most critical point of the year as it is? You would think that everybody, if they're horseshoe guys, would be there during the home stretch. Okay, guys, like it's like when you're a little kid and you're going on vacation and your mom like hands out little suckers to you in the car because you're driving from Indianapolis to Chicago. The Colts are in Crown Point right now. Like, they're that close. Okay, kids, if you can just – we're going to play a game to see, like, who can be quiet in the car the longest. They're that close, and they acted up. It's a negative. So, I mean, there's no positive spin that you can put on it, except for that, yeah, I guess give them credit for – and I think it's Shane Steichen. I do like the fact that Steichen, as a rookie head coach, is not afraid to I mean, I like the fact that this dude, whether this is a Steichen decision or a Ballard decision, I like the fact that Shane Steichen does present himself in a way where you look at it and you go, you know what, like the buck stops with that guy.
Well, that is the positive, right? Whether it was Ballard or whether it was Steichen, again, it is a negative, but the way you don't compound it into 2 negatives is you take care of it, you cut the problem off at its head, and you're like, all right, sorry, no, we're not tolerating this because of how important these final 3 games are. I agree with you, Jake. It's a negative look for those 2, and it's a negative look for the idea of the Colts culture and for the horseshoe and all that. Like, I get that part is negative, but it would be further compounded if you were not, whether you're first-year head coach or whether you are longtime general manager, stepping up, taking action, and saying we're not tolerating this. Like, that is the positive takeaway of it for me, is the quest to win these final 3 games and make the playoffs is more important than saying, it's all right, don't worry about it. We'll just make you do extra drills or you're going to miss a game.
Well, it does make you wonder what it was. And maybe
wildly so, because I can't, like, And I get it. I'm not a gossiper. Like I don't need to know what it was, but being able to know what the conduct was helps you, I don't want to say rationalize it, but it helps you really come to terms with if it's a larger issue or if it's a one-off type thing. We had that same conversation when Grover Stewart got popped, right, for performance enhancing. And then it happened later in the year with Al-Qadim Muhammad, even though he had hardly seen the field at all, was a practice squad guy. But then you start to think, well, is it systemic? Because it's two players that play similar positions. With this one, without the clarity of what it was they did, all you can do is look at the two sides you've presented, which is, A, it's a bad look for them, it's a bad look for the team, but it'd be an even worse look if you didn't do anything.
I think the thing that, to Eddie's point, I mean, McKenzie's on a one-year deal. I mean, that seemingly kind of takes care of that, right?
Yeah, it's over. He's not back next year, unless it's for just special teams alone.
And again, it's a position that the Colts have been defiant to anybody who said that they haven't addressed that position enough.
That's the larger issue.
And then, it's like, no. Like and then late in the process, they end up acquiring a guy for that position, kind of like, see, we took care of the need. Where's everybody now? Where's Bowen? Always talking about wideouts. Where is he? Well, you signed a wideout that then, with 3 weeks to go in a one-year deal that is expiring with no postseason guaranteed. What is guaranteed for Isaiah McKenzie is that he had 3 games remaining on a contract with the Indianapolis Colts. That part is guaranteed. And now he's removed from it.
And he was insignificant when he played the position this year.
Correct.
Right? You're getting outplayed by other players on the roster. You're getting outplayed by rookies. Like it was a moot signing that turned to Kevin's larger point, and has been the point that I have put at bay during this run, but we'll be reactivating, and we'll do it now, but especially once we get into draft season, is whether you think that Anthony Richardson is the franchise quarterback or not, whether you think the Colts have found him or not. I want to see more, but I feel like there's a good reason to think he could be. You are doing a disservice to yourself, to Anthony Richardson, to the franchise, to the city of Indianapolis, if you don't take the same approach that the Jaguars did in year 2 of Trevor Lawrence, which is a large majority of the offseason moves they made was to make life easier for their quarterback. And there are multiple ways that we'll have plenty of time to discuss how they can do that. I know T. Higgins has been the most popular name. Whether that's realistic or not is neither here nor there. There will be opportunities for them to address. Off-season-based work should be focused on making life easier for Anthony Richardson. That's a conversation we will reactivate, like I said, once this playoff push and however far they go ends. But that is the larger issue at play when you have a move that was made that was thought that it's going to fix some things with Isaiah McKenzie, and then not only does it not do that, his season ends with a 3-game suspension.
The T. Higgins thing to me is pretty fascinating. T. Higgins is a very good receiver. He is not a separation receiver. Here would be my hesitation with T. Higgins, who's a great player when he's healthy. He's pretty injury prone. It's not his fault. But, look up how many games T. Higgins has missed in his career. But my thing with T. Higgins is this. He's not a separation guy. So maybe you're not as worried. Maybe that elongates his career because he is not reliant upon getting separation at the line in terms of getting himself open. He just is a big target that can contour his body. He makes every impossible catch. Literally. The problem with T. Higgins, if it hits him right between the numbers, it's probably 50-50. But the 50-50 balls are 100-0 every time. He contours his body. Listen, I watched every single play that he made in college and the vast majority of his plays in the pros. But he's not as, I remember in the Alabama National Championship game, he caught a pass that he and Justin Ross, to use a kid's term, they balled out in that game, right? And when Trevor Lawrence was a freshman, Justin Ross had 2 different plays where he's making catches and he's gone, and T. Higgins is getting caught from behind. He's getting run down from behind. That's always been his play. He's not a speed guy. So in that regard, you don't have to worry about speed going away because he's been playing without that element of his game as a professional receiver. But as soon as that, you do need first step burst to be able to get some separation. And once that goes away for him, he's a decent route runner. But he has been reliant upon his hands and his vertical, his ability, to get up, to get footballs. Once the natural step of that goes away, then he could be pretty pedestrian. But the bigger issue with T. Higgins is this. He's been, would you say, Jimmy, a top what? If you were listing the best receivers in the NFL, T. Higgins is probably, like, when you click on something and it's like, what's your age? He's what, like 25 to 30, somewhere in there?
That's where I put him.
Yeah. So I don't know why it is that people think that, like, the Colts are this automatic link to him, because guess what? Two guys that are doing a radio show right now in Charlotte, or two guys doing a radio show right now in Atlanta, or two guys doing a radio show right now in Nashville that need a receiver on their roster are sitting there saying, they got to save all their money and go after T. Higgins. T. Higgins is going to get Pittman-level money.
Sure.
And the money's going to go to Pittman. Then how much do you have left over when if you still think that you can get something out of Pierce or Downs, you got to save a little bit for when you re-sign those guys as well. A couple years away, I realize. But it's a tough situation to get yourself into, especially when you've committed a lot of money already to your running back.
I use T. Higgins as the example, right? And I don't disagree with any of the points you made, but there's certain needs that should be attacked for Anthony Richardson this offseason. I would say the most paramount one, if you're not going after a big splashy name, would be another deep threat or somebody that does it more effectively than Alec Pierce. You look at two that would be costly, but would be ones that maybe you'd look at. Hollywood Brown is one who's more on like the lower talented end side. Calvin Ridley's also going to be up next year. So like you're just looking for ways to where, yes, you might overpay a little bit, but you want to make Anthony Richardson's life easier. And that's the selling point to a free agent outside of the money, is the arm talent, right? Like that, this is going to be a quarterback that's going to set you up for success. Imagine what you can do paired up with him. That's the selling point. I get that maybe Carolina could do that with Bryce Young. I'm sure the Titans could do it with Will Levis. But that is your selling point for the Colts in terms of why you'd want to come here and over those teams.
Kurt Cignetti, by the way, speaking of like next man up or in the fold, is exactly that on this show, because the new Indiana football coach joins us in under 15 minutes.
Bullseye-eventgroup.com and the Colts VIP tailgate.
high school, Kurt Cignetti, by the way, joining us just a couple minutes. When I was in high school, this band was I remember my freshman year of high school, the album, or in those days it was a tape, that everybody wanted to pass around to everybody was Steve Miller's Greatest Hits. Like, dude, you got my Steve Miller tape? And that would have been like my freshman year would have been the fall of 87, spring of 88. So at that time, most of the songs on that album were 10 to 14 years old. We, of course, thought that like we were the first installment of high school kids to discover Steve Miller. And then the Steve Miller Band concert.
Vintage, right?
What's that?
That'd be classified as vintage, correct?
Yeah, but we thought it was like current. You know what I mean? Like we didn't realize that, what we were listening to was 14 years old. But yes, it would have been vintage. So then the concert, the summer, like the summers that we all first had our driver's license, the big summer concert that everybody wanted to go to was the Steve Miller Band. So my question for you, Jimmy Cook, is that band for you would be who? Like, who was the band when you were in high school that, like, everybody, like, was totally, their summer concert was the place to be?
So, again, this undercuts the segment. I'll answer the question halfway because I'm not a big band guy, but we were big into, like, rap and hip-hop. There was an artist by the name of J. Cole, who everybody knows now, but, like, he had a mixtape that came out when I was in high school, and everybody thought it was like the greatest thing ever. We thought, oh man, but we didn't discover it. The whole world, like you mentioned.
So that to me was Eazy-E. I remember when Dope Man by NWA and Boys in the Hood by Eazy-E came out. Somebody had a tape, and it was passed all around. It was dubbed. Todd Geyer was the first person to get the tape of it, and it was passed all around, and it was mind blowing to people. And we thought that we were the first ones to discover it. And of course, what we didn't realize was that we were actually part of a pop cultural phenomenon that years later would be a best-selling movie made about the fact that NWA and Eazy-E in particular were the bridge that was gapping, quite frankly, white suburban America and African-American urban America, because all of a sudden now we were listening to the same music of kids, and that was a bond, to be honest with you. Like, I played basketball, and when we went to Arlington or Tech into kids that socioeconomically or demographically might have been different than we had the bond in the fact that it was the same music we were listening to. Public Enemy was a big part of it too. I don't know that they were listening to Steve Miller Band, but we thought Steve Miller Band. I just remember all of us like, yeah, dude, the Joker, man, that song's awesome. Well, I mean, yeah, it was like came out in '74, right? And for whatever reason, we thought we were so ahead of the times. We thought we were the best. I figured you would have said. You graduated in what year?
From high school?
Yeah.
13.
So what year was that after, and my apologies because the years to me all run together. So were you after Blink 182? Was that like 2000, 2005?
Yeah.
Limp Bizkit would have been 15 years before you, right?
Yes.
Because those guys all sucked, right? Eddie, who was your band?
Oh boy.
Did you guys ever leave the house until like a year ago?
We both fail you in this criteria of conversation because we're not big concert guys.
Right.
Well, if I was looking at like...
But just like in terms of the music you listen to, like when you were driving to school in the morning, you listened to...
Jay-Z, Kanye, J. Cole. Like that was a lot of my drive.
I rode the bus, so...
Some Outkast in there, but it was like... That was in the 2000s when they were really big.
Did you ride the bus all 4 years?
No, not until I was a sophomore.
Yeah, see, then sophomore year, the big scandal at North Central High School was you weren't allowed to drive to school unless you were a junior or senior. But by the spring
junior.
Yeah, junior and seniors when North Central, it was only 2 years, right? But all of a sudden, like you used to have to get to school at 7 o'clock in the morning before the parking lot would fill up. By the springtime, all of a sudden you'd have to get to school at like 6:45 because all the sophomores were getting their license and somehow getting a parking placard and parking. And it was all hell breaking loose because everybody's like, dude, that kid's a sophomore and he's parking here, man.
Yep.
Carl Spooth's a sophomore and he's parking in my spot. I'm going to turn him in. It was a big scandal, man. Eddie, were you a sophomore scandal driver?
No, I didn't get my license until I was a junior. I forgot. Because I was going to get it when I was a sophomore. Then
your first car was what?
I tore my ACL. It was a Chevy Tahoe, 2002.
Nice. Look at you.
Yeah.
Nice.
It was my mom's.
Jimmy, your first car?
2005 Cadillac. because my dad got his license taken away around the same time. They didn't know what to do with the car, so I lucked out. I don't have a horror car story. My dad had transitioned into not driving anymore.
I had an '83 Mitsubishi Tredia, and let me tell you, it had a power knob on it that you kicked it down, and it went from 4 cylinders to 5. Power, 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 baby. Kurt Cignetti, knew the guy in charge with the power of Indiana football, joins us next.
The Ride.
Weeks since our next guest was named as the head coach of the Indiana Fighting Hoosiers down in Bloomington. And what I love about it, Jimmy Cook, my number one factoid of fun about Kurt Cignetti. There's a lot that I like about it, but my number one fun fact that I'm convinced, and if somebody can prove this to be inaccurate, it doesn't matter. I'm convinced it's still true.
Give it to me. I don't know.
He has to be the only man in the history of college football to coach not one but 2 different Indiana universities. Right?
It's got to be an undisputed fact. I would agree with you.
Can we ask him if that's,
yes.
That's the case? Coach Kurt Cignetti, the new coach of the Hoosiers, joins us now. Coach, you've got to be the only guy to have that claim, right?
I mean, you would think so. We don't know that factually, but I know the first one won a lot. This one's going to win a lot, too.
Yeah, we're rolling with it, right? I like that. Listen, I want to get right to that from the get-go, and that is I appreciate, because I know that you've been on a couple of shows here on this radio station, for example, and you have not shied from talking about the fact that your vision, clearly, understandably, is to win football games at Indiana, and you are confident that's got to happen sooner rather than later. How much of that has always been the mantra, and how much of that is because you believe this is a program that needs that sort of belief pumped into it?
I mean, that's what happens in our program. It's not just me. It's our assistant coaches. It's players. It's choosing the right people as coaches and players. I mean, we've flipped the roster. I feel like I've done this a couple times already. This is just a bigger stage. But why shouldn't we be confident? I mean, we're used to winning. I guess we have to change the way people think. Not only our players that were on the previous teams and still remain, but, the fan base, the general public, the state of Indiana. I get it. Maybe there's a little smoke in the off season, kind of need to wake people up, get them excited. That's not a bad thing. You get to be my age, you lose your filter a little bit. You're not worried about maybe pissing somebody off and maybe it'll help you down the road because you're near the end anyhow, right? Like I'm on about the 12th hole. So I got about 10, 12 years left. That's it. So, what else can I do except win here and create a legacy and build this program into something that a lot of people thought was like impossible. But why should it be impossible? I mean, it's a beautiful place. I mean, we got what everybody else has, right? We have a commitment, too, from the president and the AD. They want to win in football, right? So I probably have some things other guys didn't have. And I also know what I'm doing.
So with that, Coach, take me through the process. Kurt Cignetti is our guest, the new head football coach at Indiana. The process of coming in of, obviously putting your stamp on it, which you're in the process of doing. I think you've already kind of done that. But feeling through the roster and navigating through which guys are going to buy in, which guys that are going to stay, having to kind of re-recruit guys that are in the portal. I mean, take me through the steps of, I guess, finalizing who your program is going to be and when you even know for certain what your roster is going to be.
A lot of it's made easier by the portal, to be honest with you. So the first day before I come in here, the old staff gets together. They do their own top 50 of remaining players on the team. It's averaged out by the director of football ops. It's sitting on my desk when I walk in the office. I know who the top-rated player is, who the 50th rated player is, right? 40% of those guys might be in the portal already, 35%. Okay. You interview the old coaches. You get a read on every player on the team. This guy's a great guy, very productive, works hard, positive teammate. This guy can't put it together. Okay, who's in the portal? Who's still on the team? Those portal guys that haven't been productive, that have fallen into the negativity, excuse makers, guys that give up, point fingers at their teammates. Okay, you're in the portal, fine. I'll see you later. The ones that have been productive, high character guys, really work hard, consistent day in, day out. You're trying to keep those guys. You don't keep them all. You keep maybe half. And then you got to go out and find your guys and guys that fit your program. And I'm into like production, not potential. So I'm looking for guys that have put together a number of years as starters and have been productive, have been relatively injury-free, right? And I'm not afraid to dip down a level to find those guys. We've been able to find them without dipping down a level. I've had a lot more success with those kind of guys than going and taking the second/third team guy at Georgia that has enormous potential. He was just sitting behind some good players. There's a reason guys don't see the field. So I want guys that have done it.
Coach Kurt Cignetti, new IU head football coach, is our guest. Coach, you mentioned the previous turnarounds that you've had building programs kind of from the ground up at IUP, at Elon, at James Madison. How is it different? How is it the same having the resources of a Power 5 conference? I know you mentioned the transfer portal makes it easier as well, but how is it different or the same on this stage compared to the other spots where you've had big turnarounds?
The only difference on this one is those other places, the transfer portal and NIL didn't exist then. So, as long as you have a commitment to be successful in those areas, then we'll be successful. There's nothing holding us back from being successful. So in my mind, what's different? Maybe the kids are a little different now in the NIL age, but I've been dealing with that for a while. The fundamentals of being successful haven't changed.
So, Coach, you said, and I don't know that I agree with this, that you're in the 12th hole. I'll say you're in the 8th or 9th hole. Is that fair? You know what I mean? Like, because I'm only a few holes behind you. So, and in radio lifetime, I'm probably in the 16th hole, right? So based on that, I'm going to take a swing of a club here on what is potentially, and I'm giving you permission to then say to me, I've done a lot of these interviews, Jake. That's the dumbest question I've been asked. I'm giving you permission to say that when I ask this question, okay?
All right. Here we go.
When you're talking about your roster and you are replacing an administration, and Tom Allen, who's now the defensive coordinator at Penn State, do you talk to, in the quote-unquote transfer of power, is there any conversation with the previous administration of, hey, I know that you're leaving this situation and it wasn't your call, but can I ask you about a few of the guys on the roster or those kinds of things? Or is it an understood when a coach is being replaced that it is a rip of the Band-Aid and there's no contact for you to get a barometer of what you're inheriting?
Well, I do interview every assistant coach for between 20 minutes and an hour about the second day I'm on the job and get a feel. I have pretty much kept the recruiting staff in place and the administrative staff, working through recruiting. So those people are still in place. Tom and I actually shared the same agent, and, I've never met him and didn't talk to him. I know he went away on a trip shortly after I was hired, so didn't really feel, like the timing was right to reach out. So I got a good feel for who's who around here and what's what. We flipped the roster, and this team's going to look this roster is going to look a lot different in January when the guys come back.
How will it schematically be different? People that are going to come to watch Indiana football are going to see, and I'm curious, when you're coming from the Sun Belt, for example, is football, or do you have to look at it and say, okay, what we did at JMU needs some tweaking, needs some changes, we've got to go under a completely different scheme, or do you just bring the same blueprint and hope it translates into the Big Ten versus the Sun Belt?
The blueprint isn't X's and O's. The blueprint is kind of what I learned from my dad, what I learned as an assistant, and a lot of what I learned from Saban, and then learned as a head coach. It's more philosophical and what you believe in and the principles and values of your program and what you preach and how you play the game and the mindset you create, and the culture, the identity, the expectation level, the accountability. X's and O's, a lot of people have great X's and O's. Those don't win games, man. But since we're talking X's and O's, right? I think we've always been on the cutting edge offensively and defensively, and we do a really good job on teams. But you're always looking to improve because you really do get better or worse. You never stay the same. At the end of the day, you got to be able to block, tackle, run, catch, and do those kind of things to be successful. But you got to put your playmakers in position on offense to make plays. Defensively, you got to get your right guys on the field and do a great job stopping the run and pressuring the quarterback, right? Creating turnovers. Special teams have to be great, no question about it. And you got to find the edge every week, and you're coaching against guys that, have been doing this quite a while. But look, there's bad NFL coaches. There's bad NFL assistant coaches. There are great high school coaches. You follow my drift?
Yeah. I get, I want to go back to your dad, actually, because when you talk about great coaches at the college level, your dad is a guy that's, in the College Football Hall of Fame. He won a lot of games at West Virginia. He's also a guy that went to Indiana, not the one here that you're coaching now, but Indiana, Pennsylvania. I believe, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, Coach, but, you had Nick Saban as kind of a mentor. Your dad would have had that with Bobby Bowden, correct?
Correct.
How much of Bobby Bowden I thought personally, Coach, and I want to go back to this, Bobby Bowden as a football man, obviously had great success. And I don't know if this story is even maybe embellished or was Hollywoodized, if that's a word. But in the movie We Are Marshall, it talks about how after Marshall's football tragedy of their plane crash, that Bobby Bowden, who was at West Virginia, which was the big dog in the state, Marshall's the smaller school, the kindness that he showed in helping Marshall and reaching out to them, or actually when they reached out, being open to them. I thought it really kind of opened the door to what kind of a character person Bobby Bowden was. And I'm curious what kind of I guess, principles your father might have learned from Bowden, if any, that were passed on to you? And then as a result, how you were able to kind of combine those with the things you learned from Nick Saban? Because we're talking about two of the real behemoths in college football history.
Yeah, and then I had a run with Johnny Majors also. I think, without question, Coach Bowden had the greatest influence on my dad as a person and a football coach. And, it just so happened as a third grader when we went to Morgantown, Coach Bowden's first year there, I was the kid on the sideline, in the locker room at halftime, listening to Bobby Bowden talk to the team at halftime. So he had a big influence on my dad. And, even though I never played for my dad or coached for my dad obviously had a very big influence on me. And when I went with Coach Saban, I had a number of years under my belt already. After 1 year with him, I felt like I'm ready, because he had it together then. He had been a head coach for 11 years, put his years in at Michigan State, LSU, and the Dolphins. Generally when you're a head coach, you make your mistakes year 1, 2, and a few on 3. By the fourth year, you're kind of up to speed. By then, Nick was in year 11. He was like on top of his game. So that was a great learning experience.
Was there a period for you, Coach? Kurt Cignetti, the new football coach in Indiana, is our guest. Even with all of that and seeing success and having, that blueprint, to use that word again, but for you personally, whether it be through the periods when you were an assistant or whether it be at IUP or Elon or maybe early in James Madison, was there a moment that you can look back on in the career of Kurt Cignetti and say, I ask my players to deep down, dig and find beyond and break through a period where maybe they are questioning themselves, and I want them to break through that barrier. What was that moment for you? Was there a moment in your career that you can look back on and say, that's where I was the most tested, and because I overcame that, I'm confident now that I'm about to turn around Indiana?
I think the Elon story is pretty amazing, to be honest with you. Went in there. They had built nice facilities. It was a nice place. I don't remember exactly what their record was over the previous 5 years, but it was really bad. I say 5-45, but it may have been 8-48 or 9. You know what I mean?
Right.
And nobody on campus believed they could win in football. Nobody. The AD didn't even believe it. And, I'd been a head coach for 6 years, and we had some talent on that team, and those kids were hungry. And we went up to Toledo the first game of the year, and they won the MAC that year. And we really played hard. And after that game, I said to myself, we got a shot. And, I'm pushing all the buttons I can to, get their juices going. The official pregame comes out, knocks on our door, says, Coach, you got to get out here. You're late. And I'm like, I'll take this team, blank, blank team out when I'm blank, blank ready.
Right.
And they erupt. You know what I mean? And, but we played well. We went on to win 8 in a row after that game. Just 8 in a row. Nobody will come to the game, they told me. They couldn't get in the games. Signs, we want Bama. So the next year, we're 4-1, right? We lost to a Power 5 team. We go up to JMU to play. Now, we're a good football team. And they got a 22, 25 game home winning streak. Somehow we're a 38-point underdog. I can't figure that out, but we are. We go up there and beat James Madison. And so those 2 years, that season and that game and that moment, I knew, something special has happened here. And there are more special moments going to happen down the road.
Coach, when I was a student at IU, I won't out the coach, but it's easy to figure out the math there. It famously would come through the mess halls at times to try to get students more engaged, more involved behind the football program. IU students infamously are out of there by the third quarter because of the struggles that have been there. And I know you mentioned that Elon, it felt like across the board, even the athletic department wasn't buying into that football could be a winning product, whereas at least in your case, it feels like the athletic department is behind you. Do you have a barometer yet of where the pulse of the fan base is, or is it too early for that in terms of they believe or they buy into the idea that you can turn them around and make them a winning product?
I mean, I've had people tell me that they haven't seen people this excited about football in 30 years this time of year. I can only go by that social media group. You know, what percentage are they? I don't know. But, you know, they're doing cartwheels upside down. I've never seen more cigarette memes. I'm not trying to promote that. It's bad for you, but they're out there. You know, hey, look, build it and they will come, right? It was a movie. I mean, win games, make it fun and exciting, and you'll pack the stadium, and it'll be wild and crazy, and that's what will happen this fall.
Now, I'm going to guess that, like, probably, maybe even, and this is, I could be totally wrong in this. My hunch tells me the only misstep you've had so far, Coach, and it wasn't in public, is that you might have actually been rooting for the Pittsburgh Steelers against the Colts. I'm just guessing that you were a childhood Steelers fan. Am I off base there?
Well, in the 70s, I was a diehard Pirates, Steeler, Penguin fan. But I'll be honest with you, I probably haven't watched an NFL game straight through. Maybe in the playoffs, you know, they get to the end, I'll watch them. I haven't probably seen 3 NFL plays all year.
Yeah, no, I get that. You're a little busy, right?
Yeah.
Was Roberto Clemente your guy?
Oh, yeah. I remember the day I heard where I was.
Yep. And you would have been, what, probably 9 years old, right? Something like that, 9 or 10 years old?
71, around 10. That's the year they beat the Orioles in the World Series.
Yep. He had a double for his 3,000th hit. I think that was his last hit, actually. One of the great humanitarians and players.
Proud as a peacock, right, that picture?
Yeah. Kurt Cignetti, our guest, the new head football coach at Indiana. What's your favorite thing so far, non-football related, just about Bloomington? Or, you know, I'm sure it's kind of a whirlwind, but you've had a chance now to kind of get your feet under you. What do you like about it? What do you like about the community and just the position that you're in now?
Well, to be honest with you, I haven't seen the town during the day yet. And I live 2 blocks from downtown in a temporary house. I mean, I leave at 4:30 in the morning. It's dark. I get home 11:30 at night. It's dark. What I like the most right now is the commitment I'm getting from the top to be successful and how excited they are and how excited the fan base is and the results that we've produced in 3 weeks here in terms of changing the roster.
You know, the culture at Indiana, to your point, Coach, is, you know, people love going down for the games as a social event. I think Indiana fans have become just accustomed to seeing it as that and not a football event. And then you go out at Assembly Hall, you grab the microphone, and I'm assuming you still stand by it, right? I mean, you grabbed the mic and the crowd went bonkers because you just went ahead and said, you know what, Purdue sucks. And so it was the addition of Ohio State and Michigan that sold me, to be honest with you, right? Like, was that just basically just impromptu, let's go?
Yeah, pretty much.
And you stand by it, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I love it.
Coach, what goes into, I know you're not going to give us the secret sauce necessarily, but what goes into flipping a recruit in the transfer portal or flipping a player in the transfer portal, or rather landing a recruit like you guys were just able to do with Tyler Cherry out of Center Grove?
You know, a lot. I mean, football's changed quite a bit, and there's a lot that goes into that. And, you know, without discussing it in great detail, you know, recruiting's a lot different than it was 5 years ago.
I would think, Coach, I was curious about this with the portal itself, because you've been very active in it, you know, on both sides. But, and I, pardon my naivety here, are you, formally speaking, is a program not allowed to contact a player until they have officially thrown their name into the transfer portal? Or, and I'm not saying your practice with it, but are there coaches that begin recruiting guys before they even have decided they're going to transfer because of the almost free agency nature of college football today?
Right. You can contact a player in the portal once he is in the portal. So even though he tweets he's going in, you got to verify it online that he's actually in. Does tampering go on? There's no doubt about it. It goes on. No. Do I do it? No. Do I tolerate it? No. Well, do I send a message to my coaches not to do it? Yes. Because you don't have to. right? You don't have to. But they're going to be in the portal. And once they're in the portal, you can recruit them. It's like these James Madison guys, right? These guys chose to go in the portal, right? If I don't recruit them, somebody else is going to recruit them. So, it just so happens today in college football, if you fire the coach or the coach leaves, a lot of guys go in the portal. Do I feel bad for James Madison that a lot of these guys went in the portal? I do, because I really cared about that place. I like it. I like the people, the leadership, etc. But once they went in the portal, I got to do my job. I'm 100% committed to IU, so I've got to recruit them.
Coach, I've always felt that Indiana high school football is a little bit underrated in terms of the level of talent that you can recruit out of the state. You agree?
It's hard for me to give you an intelligent answer on that one. I'm still learning about the state. I truthfully have not spent a lot of time here in the past recruiting. I know a lot more about the state now than I did 3 weeks ago. I know where the pocket of players generally are, and I know there's good pockets. And I believe that building a program begins with your state.
Well, Coach, in conclusion, when I was in college, I interned with a really dear buddy of mine who went to James Madison. He lives in the Philly area. He goes to James Madison football games, about every home game. And he texted me literally the day of the announcement and said, you know what? I'm really mad that you took our football coach, but I guess now it gives me reason for us to bond by rooting for Indiana. So we're going to try to get Doug Weiler to convert from – he'll still be loyal to JMU. That's his school, but we're going to try to get him on board with the Hoosiers as well.
Let's go. We're going to get a lot of people on board.
I appreciate it. Coach, we'd love to have you back on. Enjoy getting to know Bloomington, and best of luck in the continued work with turning around the Hoosiers.
All right, guys. Have a good one.
All right, Kurt Cignetti, the new head football coach at Indiana. And again, Indiana, Pennsylvania at one time. What's Indiana, Pennsylvania's mascot? Do we know?
Are we going to guess? Offhand.
I'm going to go with the Hawks. Eddie, you got to guess?
Ooh.
I'm saying Bearcats.
Bearcats, a good guess. Okay, Eddie?
I will go Cougars.
Cougars, also an outstanding guess. Whoa! See, this had to have been like Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. Like I had to have seen this at one point and known it. And the IUP, no, sorry, they're the Crimson Hawks. So if you just see a regular Hawk, it's a Crimson Hawk. Like you, Eddie, you were a Hawk, right? You were a Decatur Central Hawk?
Yep.
Were they crimson? What were your colors? Blue and gold, right?
Yes.
Were you known as like the Blue Hawks?
No.
The Gold Hawks?
Just the Hawks.
Just the what was it you were driving around in? A Yukon? What were you driving?
A Chevy Tahoe.
The Tahoe Hawks. That's Decatur Central. Man, Chevy Tahoe.
It was my mom's old car. She got a new car and then I got hers.
Still, man, you could haul half the baseball team in that bad boy.
Oh, hell yeah.
I'm not going to say that Chris Farkas had one and we might have covered the license plate a few times because he had a Bronco, though. But I'll tell you, I'll just say the off-roading potential was fabulous.
The countdown to Christmas is on.
So we were just sitting here talking, and thanks to Kurt Cignetti, by the way, fun conversation with the new head football coach at Indiana. We were just talking about the Colts situation, and Jimmy, you said there's some more, I guess, rumor, which would it be here when it comes to the two players yesterday that found out their years for the regular season complete?
Call it a visual report. Nate Atkins of The Star, who we've had on, and he's been on these airways many a time, tweeted about a half hour ago, Isaiah McKenzie and Tony Brown have had their lockers removed from the Colts locker room. James Boyd of The Athletic, who, again, we've had on the show before, quote tweeted that same tweet and said, speaks to the severity of the suspension. So take with that what you will, but that goes against my logic of, well, what happens if they make the playoffs? Because I get it. It could be a road game, right, if the division doesn't fall their way, but that feels drastic. That feels
a lot
permanent.
of people have asked me this, and I'm sure you as well. To be fair, I don't know if, and eventually it'll come out. It always comes out, right? It always comes out what happened. And what exactly could have taken place? Well, the terminology was conduct detrimental to the team, correct?
Yes.
So if it's conduct detrimental to the team, typically what that means are not exclusive to, but more often than not, the following. Fighting now, they play opposite one another. Maybe they got into a huge fight on the field and it carried over into the locker room. One would think that would be like an isolated incident, and that would be disciplined like internally or whatever else. But fighting with one another or in the locker room would usually fall into that category. Blatantly disregarding the command or wishes of coaches would fall into that category, meaning fighting with a coach, talking back to a coach, being obstinate. Now, if it's two players, one would think that, and they're in two different areas, that would be probably pretty hard to imagine. Missing bed check, honestly.
And I like that scenario because
late to meetings.
The comedy.
Well, I was going to say skipping or late to meetings would be one. Yes.
The comedy of being late for bed check has me envisioning Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard in the living room with the light on.
That's
just
right.
Waiting for them to.
It's 11:05, boys. You had a curfew. Skipping or being late to meetings would be one, Eddie. The only thing there, again, and I don't know, two different, and one would think that perhaps when it comes to film sessions, in fact, the DBs and wide receivers might be, or maybe special teams meetings. I mean, if they're both special teams guys, that probably is more likely. Missing meetings or being obstinate. I think missing a meeting or being late to a meeting is one thing, but I think openly defying a meeting is the other.
Well, but if it was missing meetings, to me, that has to be multiple violations for it to be 3 games. I feel like 1 game suspension would be fine if you're looking at, and again, we're just speculating here, but if you are handing out a 3-game suspension or a suspension that lasts the rest of the season, if it's something that could seem minor, like missing a meeting, you would think that's either of a repeat offender status or of a higher severity, like you're pointing out.
Yeah, I think, and again, apparently Stephen Holder had said that it was not a fighting or legal issue. Probably what Eddie is mentioning is the most likely, in the fact that it was within the special teams parameter and it was some sort of an issue of being obstinate about or defiant and being detrimental to the team. But the reality is this. This is a franchise that, to their credit, is in a position that is much better than we anticipated at the outset of the season was the position they were going to find themselves in. Going back to Grand Park, going back to the beginning of the year, hell, Isaiah McKenzie joined Kevin and I on the morning show and talking to him, and he was one of their big gets, kind of. Big gets is maybe the wrong word, but a guy that was thought to be able to help them in areas where they had been criticized for not addressing. Tony Brown is a special teams guy that when his number was called to play in the defensive backfield, I believe he's the one that I called Toasted Tony Brown. Like it literally, he should have a sponsorship with Kellogg's because it sounds like a cereal.
We were this
Toasted
close to T-shirts.
He's also a guy that got a lot of praise from Chris Ballard. He was like, I love Tony Brown. I freaking love Tony. In one of his press conferences before the start of the season.
Well, that obviously changed.
That's not quite the ringing endorsement I think people think it is.
Here's the thing. I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning of the show. And I'm not saying that one way is definitively right or wrong, and I don't even know which way I go with it because I kind of flip-flap back and forth, admittedly. But it's very difficult to praise a franchise for its culture and talk about how, and routinely talk about, do you ever run with guys in high school that talked about all the girls they were getting? And then, like, later you found out, you're like, that guy never had a single date. But he talked a big game, right? The guys that talked were always – and then you find out, like, after the fact, there's some other guy from high school, and you're like, dude, he went out with, like, 30 different girls and never said a word about it. Oftentimes, he or she who is the most vociferous about their brand or identity are those that are the most insecure about it. And I think all franchises do this in defense of the Colts, but the Colts are very openly at any point forward about telling you that it's about the culture and it's about being a horseshoe guy and it's about representing the shoe and all of those things. And Chris Ballard, in his defense, has been open at times about, hey, fringe players on the roster, I'm willing to take a gamble on them if I think there are character issues because I want to have a strong enough locker room that can set those guys on the narrow, and it's not as big a risk if the overwhelming culture of the locker room is that of principle and discipline. And I get it. That's cool. But it's very difficult to talk from December until May or June or July about how culture is the thing that matters and discipline is the thing that matters and leader of men is the thing that matters when then you get into the regular season and the year begins with one of your key players being suspended by the league for gambling, a second player being suspended for a lengthy period of time for gambling. Then you get into the league. You have one player who's a marquee player that holds out. You have another player who is a marquee player and misses a portion of your season for violation of PEDs. And we can get into the nuance of that and how absurd it is, but 98% of the league doesn't fall victim to that absurdity. Then when he comes back, he has to hold the door for another guy that's on his way out because he just got popped for the same thing. And then you have two more players that are having their lockers removed and are essentially done with at least this season. Certainly for the regular season in totality, they're done at the most critical juncture of the season. In a vacuum, this is the most critical three-game stretch. All three-game stretches are important, but right now, with what is in sight, it is the most critical, important stretch for them. And this is a franchise that 2 years ago, during a critical stretch, with a 90% playoff chance or whatever it might be in those, the sabermetric whatever formulas that it's weird that they actually play games if those things just determine everything officially. 90% chance the Colts were going to make the playoffs. And yet some of their most critical players knew they were taking a risk at something, and that risk blew up on them, and they were not available. So you can't preach to me about how one of the key entry points of the franchise is the culture and the discipline to be able to buy into the horseshoe if you are once again having to discipline guys. Which is it? Are you disciplining them because you are a franchise of great character? Or are you a bad judge of character because you thought guys fell into that exact criteria and then in turn you got bit by it again? Shaq Leonard, you could say that they released Shaq Leonard because everyone's accountable. Okay, clearly that message wasn't sent because if everyone's accountable, you got two more guys that, yes, you can say on one hand that you're holding them accountable, but on the other hand, you can say they actually just and yeah, these aren't mainline players. I get it. But clearly, if they are fringe players of questionable character, that you feel your locker room was going to offset that because they had a culture that was going to offset that negativity from those two players, that just failed because clearly the locker room did not get these guys to fall in line because they were released for conduct detrimental to the team. And it's not an isolated incident, Jimmy. That's my concern. It's not an isolated incident. And I get the fact that when you're dealing with 50-plus human beings, no matter what line of work you're in, whether you're an architecture firm or an advertising firm or a bottling plant or a radio station, it's difficult to get everybody within the same step. I get it. I totally get it. But that's part of why you can't consistently sell it to me that that's what you're doing, because consistently you're having to come back and offer me a rebate.
Kevin Bowen highlights this very well on 1075thefan.com. His work's always tremendous, but you can get the piece from Shane Steichen's comments. I've officially flipped the other way. I don't think it is a negative for the selfishness of Isaiah McKenzie and Tony Brown, but this is a first-year head coach that has had a couple of crossroads moments already this season that haven't had to do with wins or losses. It's had to do with the type of coach you're going to be, what you're going to tolerate, if somebody's bigger than the team itself. And you mentioned and highlighted it well, Jake, with Shaq Leonard. That's a player that was at a time when he was paid what he was paid, was supposed to be a face of the franchise, was a face of the franchise. And you move on from him because it's a turning point and you realize that, no, it's our time with you is done. It's time to move on. And then swiftly, we'll never be able to fully answer this until we know what they did. But whether it was something the league could have penalized McKenzie and Brown for or not, it is a first-year head coach that has shown time and time again, and it is disgruntling that he's had to do it time and time again, but he's shown that he's going to be extremely accountable, and he's not going to tolerate it, and there's no long leash here. The clarity of knowing what they did would help rationalize if this is a systemic thing where they really need to look at the roster and figure out why disciplinary actions are needed. But the fact that he's not afraid to make those disciplinary actions is, and maybe this is the glass half full look for me, enough for me to look at what's happened and say, this is a first-year head coach that's grabbing this thing by the reins and is not going to tolerate missteps at the most critical juncture of the year.
But what I'm saying to you, I don't disagree with that, Jimmy, but what I'm saying to you is if you are a franchise that is built the way you claim, then those missteps shouldn't be something that first-year coach has to deal with.
I would agree.
That's the issue, right? Now, are these guys that are replaceable? Yeah, probably. But special teams, somebody asked me this question. It's a pretty good one. Isn't Tony Brown the one that accidentally bumped into McKenzie on the muff punt? But if it's that would lead to some sort of a fight between them. And again, reports are that that's not what it was. I don't know that we'll know definitively what it was. It might be. Who knows? Maybe it was actually that they were involved in a love triangle with Roy Hibbert and Paul George. Isn't that what dissolved that
I thought it was
Pacers
Lance
team?
Stevenson.
Well, it was Lance Stevenson.
I thought it was the Andrew Bynum trade.
the Andrew Bynum trade. That's another one, right?
Evan Turner?
Yeah.
Bynum was the... Yeah, Bynum was... No, it was a Bynum signing, right?
Correct. Yeah, bringing him in.
And then the Evan Turner trade is the one that broke somebody. I can't remember who it was. Got broken by that. That broke the confidence of somebody. So, we never definitively know answers. And they're not going to say... They don't owe it to us to tell us, quite truthfully.
Am I in the wrong? Am I the bad person for saying that I'm not fully concerned unless one of two things are occurring? A, they're not dealing with it, or B, until it happens with someone of note. Is that bad of me? Like, I get it. It still nullifies the whole Colts culture for the shoe.
You don't think Grover Stewart's of note?
He is, but you can isolate that incident with the other ones, right? Like, it's a separate thing compared to conduct detrimental to the team. They're both inactions that have caused you to miss time, but
let me ask you this.
I think Grover, I want that on the record. I think Grover Stewart is of note.
What is the position?
If Michael Pittman Jr. would have gotten in trouble for this, then I would be like, okay.
What if Michael Pittman Jr. is in trouble from a health standpoint, and even though he's not necessarily a mainline player who has shown much this year, who is a player that if everybody has to elevate a rung because Michael Pittman Jr. is not there, who's the guy that becomes an important part of the wide receiver room?
I mean, I wouldn't have said McKenzie to start the year. I'm not trying to undercut your point. I would have said Downs. I would have said Pierce.
But again, Jimmy.
But to your point, yes, you would want another body there. Yes,
what I'm saying is, if the wide receiver room is capacity of 4,
yeah,
and Michael Pittman Jr. or capacity of 3, and Michael Pittman Jr. can't go in the room because the lights are too bright and he's in concussion protocol, right? Who's the guy that then gets admitted into the room?
Would have been McKenzie in that
right.
case.
So now all of a sudden, if he's not there, he's out, right? And you have that's the challenge
Sure.
is is he a great wide receiver? No, of course not.
I don't mean
but
to
he is
undercut the point.
He's a depth piece, right?
But it doesn't. It matters. It matters for your point. I'm not undercutting that, but from like a win-loss standpoint, it's over. Like if Pittman's done, you're not suddenly fixing that because McKenzie's on the roster.
But you can't unless you're a franchise that's constantly preaching next man up.
Correct.
And if you're constantly preaching next man up, you can't preach that to me on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then on Tuesday, Thursday tell me the next man up actually just got kicked out the door.
Yeah.
Because you're preaching to me on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, character matters, and on Tuesday, Thursday, you say you had guys in with bad character.
You're talking out both sides of your mouth.
Correct.
Right?
It's just a matter of being consistent is
Sure.
all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm not damning them for that. I'm just saying the reality is that sometimes the way things are marketed are in totality glossed a little bit. We all do it. We all do it. On your resume, what do people have? Like somebody worked for 10 years, somebody worked as a pencil sharpener.
Sure.
Right? What was your job at the law firm? You sharpened pencils every day. You know what that's called? On your resume, that's called mechanical engineer of supply, right?
The bigger issue with all of this is the Colts paint this pristine image about the franchise.
Correct.
And now there's a little smudge. There's
Correct.
a couple smudges on the picture. Doesn't mean the picture's fully ruined, but now you start to worry, is the entire thing going to turn into a disaster? Is it going to be a ruined work of art? Or are they able to restore it and take step forwards to do that? Shane Steichen shouldn't have to do that, but he's not shied away from it as a first-year head coach. That said, the idea of this being a larger issue of maybe it not being a rosy rainbows and butterflies type of perfect culture, hashtag for the shoe, is a bit concerning.
Hey, Jake. Amir Speed was the one that bumped Isaiah McKenzie on the muff punt. I love this, by the way. Jake, don't rule it out. Paul George was in town to begin the week. There we go. Paul George is the culprit, right? Lance Stevenson came back from Utah in the G League or wherever he was to visit Paul George, and all hell broke loose, and 2 Colts ended up paying the price for conduct detrimental to the team. Beautiful. By the way, Indiana last night struggled. Morehead State, they ended up getting the win. That's the good news. And they had kind of an unsung hero that you didn't think going into it that delivered for them. Maybe that's even more good news, but there were some areas of concern. We'll discuss that, and Bruce Weber will join us to discuss that and more coming up in just under 15.
BullseyeEventGroup.com and the Colts VIP tailgate.
Little tidbit. I don't know if I'm supposed to say this trivia, but I'm going to. You know the
is it going to be detrimental to the show? I don't want to have to suspend you for 3 games. Okay, all right, okay. All right. 3 shows, sorry.
Our sister station B105.
Yep.
They do. You know, like when you listen to the station online, you can do the thumb up, thumb down for songs or whatever. That song right there has the highest approval rating. Like amongst music surveys, "Living on a Prayer" by Bon Jovi has the highest percentage of like thumbs up.
I wouldn't dispute it.
I always thought it was overrated, but I mean, how can you beat Down Under by Men at Work? So that's just me. Last night, we talked a lot about Indiana, and we will do so with Bruce Weber coming up, but let's give a tip of the cap. We're not wearing hats right now, but if we were, let's give a tip of the cap. How about Thad Matta on the job he's done at Butler? 8-0 at home. Last night, quality win. I mean, they're 1-0 in the league because they beat Georgetown, who we know is down, but still. Now it gets real, though, because Providence is coming off a win against Marquette. Obviously, it's a good league, but we talked to Kurt Cignetti just about the challenge, Jimmy, in flipping rosters. That's basically what Butler had to do, right? Is just flip the roster at Butler. And Thad Matta's got a team that we haven't talked a lot about him, but standing at 10-2, 1-0 in the league, sure, it gets real now. But for a team that I myself thought, kept wondering if Butler was the right team for the Big East. It's a challenging league this year because we know Marquette's good. Providence obviously is good. There are a lot of good teams in the Big East, but they've gotten off to a good start. And again, Hinkle Fieldhouse, Butler should be tough to beat at home. That's the bottom line, and it's good to see that Butler right now is tough to beat at home.
They were a couple baskets here or there. I'm not saying this is where it turned, but they were a couple baskets away from a massive neutral site win over FAU on Thanksgiving. Like they were right there in that game. And took it the distance and then some, ended up losing by 5, but it feels different this year. Maybe it was just that first year of growing pains of Thad getting in the right guys, getting things set up to where he wants things to be. You're right, it does get real, but the opportunity for separation or to prove, no, this is a different Butler team, we belong here in the Big East, like you mentioned, at Providence, at St. John's, and then I'm not afraid to throw a little Hinkle magic out there. 5th ranked UConn comes to town, 5th of January at Hinkle. You're right. Like that should be a place like it was a nightmare for Villanova 5-6 years ago. That should be the same level of palpability in the air when UConn comes to town here to open 2024.
How many people, I've asked this question before, people that are college basketball fans, how many people, certainly prior to Brad Stevens getting there, the number is way lower. But how many people know Butler's in Indianapolis?
Prior to or now?
Now. Like, you just stop. If you go to, like, if we were going to go right now to give me 2 teams in the top 25, give me 2 random teams that are ranked in the top 25 that are not great. Okay, I'm looking at it right now, okay? We're going to go to a Ole Miss, who's ranked 25th. Ole Miss is playing Colorado State. At Colorado State, 16th ranked Colorado State is hosting 25th ranked Ole Miss. We go there. 20% of the fans are Ole Miss fans that like Rocky Mountain High, so they made the trip out. So we go in and we just randomly ask 100 people at that game, where's Butler University? How many know Indianapolis?
5.
Think it's that low? I mean, you might be right. I think
if you go outside the Big East and you go outside the Midwest/East Coast, if you go down south or you go out west, I think it's small.
I think when they had the Final Four here and Butler was in it, and so all the stories about the Hinkle Fieldhouse and Hoosiers, I would think maybe still, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah, this goes back to your music game of what happens if you ask a 7-year-old. I mean, that was 13 years ago when they made that run.
No, I know. That's what I mean. That was a long time ago, right? I mean, I think most people now know where Gonzaga is, right?
Yeah.
Do you know where Gonzaga is?
At a minimum, you know it's out west.
Blank there.
It's in Washington, right? It's in Spokane?
That's right. I know this because when I was on a road trip to Seattle when I was 25 years old, Mike Byron, Dave Steinberg, and I stopped at a restaurant called Senor Froggy's. Don't sue me, statute of limitations. Their food was fabulous, don't get me wrong. It tasted wonderful. We loved every minute of it. We pulled out in Spokane, and we were going to go check out Gonzaga. John Stockton's dad ran a bar there, and we're like, literally, like we pulled out of the restaurant and got on the road, and all 3 of us at the same time were like, did we check the expiration date on Senor Froggy's? And we basically had to break into a building on the fringe of the Gonzaga campus because once your body knows you're within range of an actual toilet in that situation, things become accelerated. And, yeah, Gonzaga, one of the poor buildings there. I probably still should apologize. Bruce Weber, by the way, mercifully is next.
93.5 and 107.5.
Now, I'm going to make you guys very uncomfortable here, okay?
What's new?
And it might make our next guest uncomfortable. I don't want to make him uncomfortable. But when I was doing the morning show with Kevin Bowen, which is now, of course, the Wake Up Call with KB and Andy, which I enjoyed working with Kevin and Mark and had a great time with it, but I'm not necessarily a morning person, right? And we, on a couple of occasions, had our next guest on the program, and I thought he was the best guest we had. I thought he was the most informative. I thought he was the most engaging. I thought he was the most personable, but I loved his energy. And had I stayed on that program, at some point I was going to ask him if there's any way that he could like do some sort of a vocal recording of an alarm clock for me, telling me to wake up. Because when you talk to him, then you want to run through a wall. Now, is that uncomfortable if I say that I'd like to have Bruce Weber on my phone telling me to wake up?
No, I don't think so. But you want to ask him, but I don't think so.
It probably makes him uncomfortable, too. He was on the call last night for the Big Ten Network with Indiana and Morehead State. Bruce Weber joining us on the show. Hi, Coach. How are you?
I'm doing fine, and I'll do anything if you need help getting up.
Well, I'm telling you, man, you are literally like instant energy. You're like the 5-hour energy drink. I love it, right? Hey, let's.
I guess when you coach 340 days a year, you better have energy, otherwise you're in trouble.
That is correct, and of course it's all about getting guys with energy. So let's get to last night with Indiana, and it was obviously late in the game when they found that energy, but. Give me your overall assessment. Seemed to me like Indiana found something that worked for them against Kansas and stuck with it against Morehead State, but they never really made adjustment throughout the course of the game, and that allowed Morehead State to get out on them because Morehead State handled it differently than did Kansas. But give me your assessment on, let's say, the first 60% of that game.
Well, I really think it was a little bit of a hangover game. When I talked at the start of the broadcast, my biggest worry as a former coach for the IU team and this coaching staff was, were they going to be mentally ready? Were they going to have the energy, the intensity? And, not only the hangover, but people don't always realize you get to these holiday games. They just finished exams last week, and now they get in this routine where they can sleep longer in the morning, because they don't have classes. They get out of their regular routine, and we've always found that they get a little lethargic. So, you have this tough loss where I thought for 30-plus minutes, 35 minutes, they played as well as they could against Kansas. Obviously, they just didn't finish the job. But you have that loss, and then you have the holiday part, and they just couldn't get it going. There was the coaches during the shoot-around. They were saying one of the assistants jumped in there and stopped it and said, hey, we got to start talking. We got to get some life going. And, you think the coaches know it, but the players got to know it, and it's easier said than done. And, that's what happened. It wasn't what they were doing as much as how they were doing it. It's the execution. It's the energy. And then at last, whatever it was, last 12 minutes, you could just see they picked up the energy, especially on the defensive end, and they, got after them, disrupted them, made it tough, got over ball screens. But there were some possessions early where it was just a simple ball screen, rescreen, and they were getting layups, they were getting dives and, tip-ins, just – They just didn't. They weren't on their toes, and they weren't the aggressor. And credit to Morehead State, they did a great job. They're older guys. Obviously, it's a big game for them, and they were ready to play. And Indiana was fortunate at the end to finally start making a couple threes and some free throws, and then really doing a good job down the stretch getting it inside, which put them in foul trouble and got to the free throw line, and they finally made their free throws.
Bruce Weber is our guest. We're talking about Indiana's game last night with Morehead State. Coach, in the Kansas game, it seemed like, Trey Galloway was able to get a lot of points for Indiana in that game because if they would go inside to renew or wear, then there was basically Kansas was saying, okay, like we're going to stay here and not switch off down low and let the wings have their moments. And Galloway was able to capitalize on that. I felt like last night Indiana tried to do that more, and Morehead State just said, no, we'll go ahead and kind of free up and double over it and cut off that wing, and that's where things became difficult. But it seemed to me like Indiana was too reliant on just that combo play and not facilitating offensively elsewhere. Am I being too critical?
Yeah. No, I think a little bit right. They found something that worked against Kansas. Actually, Morehead State found something that worked against IU's defense, and they exploited it a lot of the game. Obviously, the one player, Jordan Lathren, he went, got in a heat check and went crazy, had one of those magical games. But IU found something that was working against Kansas. Now, they were trying to get it inside. They thought they'd have an advantage yesterday, but Morehead State, their whole game plan was to blitz that post, to double team the post, make it tough. They got some turnovers off of it. I think they really got Ware frustrated and took him out of the game. He had 0 points in the first half, and he's your leading scorer. So, and then people adjust when you run a play. How are you going to guard it? That's the first thing. A couple sets, the little handoffs where Galloway was getting down the lane, Morehead State just did a better job of defending it than Kansas did, and they took it away. They disrupted it. Now you don't make threes and you don't make free throws, and it makes it tough, on your offense. And, you can say, oh, the coach should have tried something else. Well, a lot of those shots were open shots or got them to the free throw line. They just didn't make them, and for me, a lot of that is just not being ready to play, and getting that mental part of it. And I looked at the end of the game, I'm looking, there's 2 freshmen, 2 sophomores, and Galloway. And, so you got a lot of young guys out there that haven't played a lot of minutes, and they're going to go through some ups and downs and growing pains as they move forward in the season.
Big Ten Network's Bruce Weber is our guest. Coach, you mentioned this on the telecast last night, looking ahead to March and the fact that to this point in the young season, IU does not have any big marquee signature wins yet to their name, and a loss like that to Morehead State, which, again, they didn't lose. They found a way to win, but you highlighted the late game that if they were to lose that game, that's one that could come back to haunt you on Selection Sunday. Is that something as a coach after the fact, after a loss like that goes through your mind at all of, okay, now we really got to pick it up because that might be a deciding game when the committee is either saying we're in or out or making the difference between a 4 seed and a 7 seed?
Yeah, there's no doubt. All these games can make a difference. Who knows what's going to happen now, but they had 3 marquee games in that non-conference, and in UConn and Auburn and Kansas, and they weren't able to get any of those. So now, how do you get a marquee win? You're going to have 4 or 5. I'm not sure. I didn't look at their schedule. If they're playing Purdue twice, Illinois twice, Michigan State twice, Wisconsin twice. So you're going to have 4 or 5 teams that you're playing once or twice that are going to be, I would say marquee games, chances for marquee wins. So they can get some wins there, but you don't want a bad loss like that. And again, I think, Morehead State's a good team. They're probably going to win their league. They had veteran guys. I was surprised by their presence inside in the post. They blocked shots. The young man from Xavier to transfer, Miles, was really intimidating, did a great job of protecting the paint for them, which made it tough on Galloway and Ware and other people that drove to the hoop. So they're a good team, but I'm looking at the net rating, and you just don't want a home loss to a team like Morehead on your resume late as you're getting into late February into March.
Speaking of that, Coach, Bruce Weber is our guest of the Big Ten Network. Has Purdue put together the most impressive non-conference resume of anybody we've seen like in the last 5 years? I mean, what Matt has been able to do outside of conference, and I'm not talking about March. I know people are going to bring that up, but it's really remarkable the wins they've been able to put together. But this year, to me in particular, the good win column for Purdue, looks like a CVS receipt. I mean, it's just as long as can be. To me, it's as impressive as I've seen in a long time. What say you?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I talked to Matt yesterday for quite a while, and it was one thing we talked about, and it actually people don't realize how important scheduling is. And years ago when I was a young coach trying to figure things out, Coach Katie in a meeting said, scheduling may be more important than recruiting. And I looked at him and I was like, you're crazy and all this stuff. But he started talking about it, and he made me realize, and obviously the more experience I had as an assistant and a head coach, that scheduling is important. When you have a team like Purdue They needed challenges. They needed experiences against as many tough opponents they could get. Win or lose, they needed those experiences, and they played different styles. You got Marquette. Even the exhibition game against Arkansas, I thought that was really smart to go on the road and play that game. So they played all these different teams from all different parts of the country. It not only gets their resume up there for, hopefully a number one seed, but it also will have those experiences as they go into March, hopefully into April, that these players have been through. So he was smart. It's a great resume, and it helps to win those games. It makes it, if you lose a few, ask Tom Izzo if he's happy about his schedule right now. It can put you in a bind. On the other hand, I would tell you Fred Hoiberg's done a great job at Nebraska, and people have criticized him. He knew he was losing some veteran guys, and he had a lot of new players, and he just played a bunch of home games, and now he's got some wins. He's got some experience. He goes to Kansas State and wins, and wins a game in the conference against Michigan State. So all of a sudden now they're talking about them being in the tournament. So, again, they can schedule yourself into the tournament, and you can also hurt yourself and put yourself in a bind as you proceed into later in the season. If you had too many tough games and you don't get any of those wins, it could make your team in a big bind.
Which team between Indiana and Purdue, Bruce Weber, and look, knowing what you need to do and being able to do it against a team are two different things. I get that. But between Indiana and Purdue, if you were game planning against either of the two of them, which one has the more clear-cut Achilles that you exploit and go after and say, the recipe for beating that team is the following? Would it be Indiana or Purdue that offers the more clear and easy thing to navigate in terms of determining what would beat them? Not executing it, but determining them. Which one has more clear vulnerability?
I think I was just going to bring that up. You said executing, because I talked with somebody this morning about this. It's one thing to post trap, but if you don't practice it from day one and the scramble's out of it and it's not part of your regular game you have daily, you can just say, we're going to post that trap Zach Edey or where, and you don't have the rotation stuff. It's hard to do. You just can't do that. You just can't add it into your system. It's got to be something you do daily. So that execution is important. There's no doubt Purdue has some Achilles heel. That they're obviously pressuring the guards, post trapping Zach. They're shooting so much better. It was so much more obvious last year. Make them shoot it from three instead of shooting the ball better. That's kind of taking that away. Indiana has, I just think because they're younger and they haven't shot the ball away from three right now, they probably have more obvious game plan, Achilles things that you can take advantage of at this point. Now, can Coach Woodson, can they continue to improve? From Auburn to Kansas, they made big improvement. And it helped to play Kansas at home. There's no doubt. And Assembly Hall at a high pitch and a high level is a special place to play, and they took advantage of that. But they've made improvement. That's, they have to continue making improvement, getting more out of other people. To get Walker involved last night off the bench was huge. I think the two freshmen, if they can continue to improve, not only on the offensive end, but the defensive end too, it's going to make them more tough to game plan against because they have other options.
Bruce Weber of the Big Ten Network, nice enough to take some time with us. Coach, you mentioned IU and their three-point shooting. On the year, they're about 27% from beyond the arc, and they take about just under 4 a game. The counter to that is, they're going to play physically defensively, and they're going to hit their threes. Even if other teams are going to take a large volume of them, it's going to balance out. From an offensive standpoint, though, that amount of threes a game with that percentage backing it up, I'm not talking about winning a national championship. I'm not talking about even being a second weekend team. Is it enough stylistically to win and make the tournament in today's college basketball if you're struggling like that and don't take a ton of threes?
I know we've talked about it on the network. It puts them in a bind. There's no doubt. And, when you talk about game planning, you saw it last night. Morehead State said, we're going to clog that lane. Now it was part of their system, the post trap. They did a good job. They had a shot blocker. So they were able to kind of boggle them up. And it put them in a bind. And if they wouldn't have made a couple down the stretch, they probably would have lost that game. So it's going to make it difficult on them. Hopefully it looks like Galloway's a little better rhythm now. So if he makes some, Mbako, it seems like he's playing with a little more confidence and can make some of those. The big thing is who else can make him. And, Ware will make a one every other game. I think that's off a pick and pop. There's no doubt. But can they find somebody else? Can Cups finally, make one? Is there somebody else that, that can really step up and make a couple shots that'll help?
Coach, which Big Ten team has the most versatile array of styles they can play effectively?
Oh, man. Maybe Illinois right now. They have such great length at all the positions. They're not like a big team, but they're so big at the guard positions. And Shannon's, he's an older guy. He's a veteran. And, he's been, 5 years. I played against a freshman. He's a little skinny guy at Texas Tech. And you could take advantage of that, but he's gotten bigger. Guerrier's really helped them, so they and even Damas has a good frame and good size. So and you got a point guard, Ty Rogers, 6'7". So the one question for me with them is like when they went to Tennessee, if they can really score, if they keep them out of transition, can they score enough in the half court offense? And that's we'll see as conference goes as they go on the road. Can they do that? That'll be the big question.
Hey, are you enjoying the TV and obviously in this case radio, but just the TV work, whether it be in the booth with Dave and the guys at Big Ten Network or being on the road and doing the color analyst? Is it hard not to revert automatically back to like looking at it and falling into coach mode? And have you enjoyed it so far, the transition?
Yeah, I have enjoyed it. It keeps me busy. And keeps me involved in it. I really love the people at the Big Ten Network, and I was there at Illinois when it started. I got to know those guys a little bit. As Dave Revson was the one I really got to know because I was on with him several times and did some shows even when he was with ESPN. But they're just good people, and they care, and they love the league. I think if you listen to last year, the ACC, I think it was Coach Capel and somebody else said, we got to promote our league better. The Big Ten, listen to the network. They promote and push the league. And I think our league does a great job. Obviously, Andy Katz, he always sees things as sunny and bright, and he really tries to help promote. And so that's great to have him there because he's got a national platform, and Mike DeCourcy also. So I love being with those guys. I didn't know if I'd like the games, and it's a little more stressful because you got to do a lot more prep and knowing the players, and I do love going to practice, shoot-arounds, watching coaches, talking with them, getting to know them, and it's that part of it is fun for me, and it still keeps me excited, and I enjoy doing it. I only have. They give me 7-8 games or so, but my main job is hopefully being in the studio, being the coach. I think they're going to add Coach Beeline's going to add on the weekends once we get into league play. So it'll be nice to have two veteran coaches that have been in the league for a long time and hopefully help promote the league. My only thing is sometimes I got to be careful not. This is what I would do. I don't want to get into that because then people start questioning, Coach Weber said we should have done this or whatever.
Yep.
So it's that part. It's that hard part. And I try to watch what I say. I try to, when it's obvious, hey, you got to play with energy. You got to play, stats back it up. They had Indiana had 0 steals yesterday at halftime. They had 1 block shot. So, they just – those stats, we call them play hard stats. Hubie Brown used to years ago did deflections, and he said I could always tell if my teams are ready to play how many deflections they have. Shaka Smart does that. You always see the boards.
And Tom Crean was all about the deflections.
Yeah, it's huge, and it's just, are you ready? Are you ready to play? I think are you on your toes or on your heels? And that's a big thing to watch. So those things are obvious, and I think I can bring those facts out. But I hate to question the coach because I'm not at practice every day. People say, why don't they play the freshmen? Well, I can see it. They're never in position on defense. And, they don't talk on defense, and everyone looks to the offensive part, but they're giving up layups off of a simple ball screen action. And, you don't even see it because they're so out of position, you don't know they're getting exploited. But, that's the thing you don't see as a fan or as somebody that's not at practice every day to recognize that. So that's where hopefully I'm careful about it and don't step my bounds with coaching as I'm announcing.
You got the best of both worlds now, Coach, because you get to game plan, go to shoot around, go to practice like you're coaching. Then you get to watch the games from the sideline like you're coaching. And then win or lose, it doesn't affect your mood. And you get to go out and have pizza. That's the best of both worlds, right? Totally different than back in the coaching days.
Pizza and a beer definitely are after post-game meals. So,
I love it.
But what else is fun is I have a lot of coaches call me and just ask me, what do you think? And, Tom Izzo is a Hall of Fame, Naismith Hall of Fame coach, and he calls, and I always kind of put in there a little asterisk, Coach, you're a Hall of Famer. I don't know if I can tell you something, but this is what I see. And, when people, even the Morehead State coach, he texted me this morning and asked me what I thought. So that's always fun, too. And I love helping and mentoring coaches. And, you can always keep learning. If you don't keep learning in the business, you're going to be in trouble.
Last night, Indiana could have used a Bruce Weber wake-up call. That was the problem, right? And then once they got it, they're good to go, right? Coach, we appreciate it, and it's always good stuff, man. Always enjoy having you on, and we appreciate it and certainly look forward to watching you.
Hey, if you need energy, you can grab a clipboard and you can break that thing and get yourself fired up. My manager screwed me up a few years ago. They gave me this plastic one you couldn't break, and I almost broke my knee on this thing. And it almost hit me in the face on the way up after it bounced off my leg. So, so if you need a wake-up call, that somebody get some clipboards, get them in the morning, just slap yourself. It's a good way to get up.
All right, we'll try it, Coach. I appreciate it as always.
All right. Happy holidays.
All right, same to you. Merry Christmas. Bruce Weber, of course, longtime college basketball coach, and on the sidelines, one of the great college basketball games of all time, that great Illinois-Arizona game. Really good stuff and really good perspective about Purdue and Indiana. And, he even mentioned here's a trivia question for you guys. I had to look this up. Every year, you fans of the 1976 Indiana Hoosiers, every year you start looking as we start getting into conference play, who's out there that could be the one that takes it away, last undefeated? There are 4 undefeateds left. And one of them would be the ultimate killer if they were the one to do it. But we'll tell you who they are. We'll check in on it, and we'll do it next.
My little brother's friends
Now, I'm going to give you guys a little quiz. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
The 1976 Indiana Hoosiers at 32-0 were the last team to go undefeated in college basketball. Now, hear me out before wagering your guesses or jumping in and saying names of schools. There are currently 3 schools in college basketball that are undefeated. 3. There are 3 remaining. Okay? One of them is the former school of an Indiana coach. Another is the current school of a former Indiana coach. And the third is the former school of a former Indiana coach who, when he came to Indiana, was replacing a coach who had defeated this school in the Final Four. Would you like to guess any of the 3 schools that are remaining undefeated in college basketball?
Cougars.
The Houston Cougars.
I cheated, so I can't play.
Is correct. Okay, so the schools that you cheated to look up, Jimmy, fall into which category that I just named?
I can name the
I think that is the last one you said. You want me to also
the 2
name
schools
a school?
that are remaining that are undefeated. One of them is
I haven't looked. So.
One of them, an Indiana coach came from there, and the other one was a former Indiana coach came from this school and was replacing a coach who defeated this school with him at the helm in the Final Four.
Eddie, you go.
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma was coached by Kelvin Sampson, defeated by Mike Davis in the Final Four. Mike Davis left, and Kelvin Sampson left Oklahoma to come coach in Indiana. Kelvin Sampson, who is now, of course, coaching at Houston. So the third.
I'm drawing a blank on the third.
Okay. Jimmy? The third is a school that is coached, that was coached at one point and is now coached by an Indiana coach.
James Madison.
James Madison is correct. There are your 3 undefeateds.
There's one more.
Oh, there is one more?
Mm-hmm.
What league? What
They
conference?
Are in the SEC.
I don't know how I overlooked this one. Does it have an Indiana tie?
I don't think so, but I'm not the historian.
Well, I haven't. Oh, Ole Miss?
Yes.
Yeah. Ole Miss, actually, here's your Indiana tie with Ole Miss off the top of my head. Ole Miss in Kansas City in the year 2000 won their first NCAA tournament game by eliminating Troy Murphy and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. There's your Ole Miss connection.
There you go.
How about Porter Moser, though, from Loyola going to Oklahoma and having the Sooners? And I don't know Oklahoma's schedule, but clearly, so here's the thing. Because I do think there are Indiana fans that look every year to see who's going to be the last undefeated. And
they got North Carolina on the road tonight.
Houston would be an absolute buzzkill because it's Kelvin Sampson, and we know how Indiana fans feel about Kelvin Sampson. But Houston and Oklahoma, one of the 2 of those is going to cannibalize the other because they're both in the Big 12.
Correct.
So one would think you're safe there. JMU, one would think that if they go undefeated through what are they in? Are they in basketball-wise, are they in the Ohio Valley or Sun Belt?
Sun Belt, I think.
But either way, if they get into the tournament, one would assume that once they go up against a Purdue or an Arizona or, a Duke, that they'd be in trouble. And then Ole Miss, I mean, come on. Ole Miss in anything in sports, is there any college program athletically, nothing against them? I've been to the Grove. Like, I've done the tailgate at Ole Miss. Is there any program, though, like college athletic program that gets you more excited every year and one of the 2 sports gets out to a good start and then they get into league play and water finds its level real quick?
Well, JMU beat Michigan State to start the season.
I did know that. I mean, I think JMU is good. Don't get me wrong. But, I've always wondered this. If you had to factor in, let's say that you were a fan of a university. Okay, this is a 2-part question.
Okay.
Of all Division I programs, if you factor in, and let's say that you are a diehard season ticket holder for football and basketball, so none of this reverse jacket, IU basketball, Notre Dame football, none of that, right?
Yeah.
You are a fan of
hate that stuff.
Both teams.
Yep.
Based on that, which university would give you the most, over the course of your lifetime, you've seen the most mediocre in both? You're not terrible. You're not terrible. You're every 4 or 5 years you go to like a December 18th rainy and Mobile, Alabama bowl game. but you never win more than like 7 games. And every 4 or 5 years, you get into the NCAA tournament and you win a game, but never more than that.
I mean, today
in both
the last 10 years, USC. I get it. I know they're prestigious. I understand. But if I'm saying today's fan, I get it.
But I'm saying in your entire lifetime, from your grandfather, your uncle, all the way through, it's just been, you're like, you know what? I am the definition of mediocrity. I mean, my Missouri. If you're a Missouri fan, like you're decent every year in both sports, do you ever actually break through and have like serious? Yeah. Missouri's had a few basketball teams that have been okay, right? Rutgers.
I mean, that's a fine line in terms of
Oklahoma.
They're worse than mediocre, you could argue.
Oklahoma, I think of as better. Oklahoma has been to the college football playoff like 3 times in the last 10 years. I'm talking about like a team that like has never won more than 7 games, but never won fewer than like between 4 and 9 wins or 8 wins every year. Minnesota. Okay. Minnesota's a good one, right? I mean, like if you're a Minnesota fan, you've been to the tournament a few times. You went to one Final Four and it blew up your entire athletic program. But, you know, I mean, Minnesota, if they go to like the Little Caesars Bowl, it's like, hey, that's awesome. You know, every 5 years we're get all the boys together. Let's go. We're road tripping. Let's go to Detroit and go see the Gophers play, right? And then in basketball,
what was that?
You've never talked to people from Minnesota or Wisconsin?
I have, but they don't sound anything like that.
That had soda flavor.
Minnesotans? Have you not been to northern Minnesota?
Nope.
Have you never been to Fargo, which is North Dakota, right across the river?
I've never been north, really. I've been to Michigan, and that's about
Wisconsin is where. Oh yeah. Oh, I'll tell you, the pack there. You know, call up Toter.
Yep.
When I was in college, Eddie, my roommate was from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
The UP.
And during graduation, somebody brought down his family came down, and they brought a videotape of everybody from his town congratulating him. And on the videotape, they're like, "Hey, Toter!" And I'm like, "What are they calling you?" And I'll never forget his cousin came to stay with us, and he goes and gets in the shower, and he leans his head out, and he's like, "Hey, can you bring me a tool?" I'm like, "A tool? Like, is the shower leaking?" "No, I need a tool." "What do you need, a hammer? A screwdriver?" "No, I got to tool off." "Oh, you need a towel." Okay. Now, likewise, what university would give you the best if you were a fan of both sports? If you're a fan of both sports, what university gives you the most riches, both sports combined? Historically. I mean, you're a 60-year-old guy, historically. USC would be close, but basketball-wise, they're pretty nondescript until late. And UCLA might be the winner. Yeah. UCLA or Michigan. Michigan would probably – it's one of those two, is it not?
Yeah, probably because of the Fab Five, yeah.
Ohio State for a time.
Michigan's gone well beyond the Fab Five.
Well, that,
basketball's teetered off, but –
What's that?
Ohio State.
Ohio State's a really good one. Ohio State's really good. I mean, because they're good in basketball. They're obviously elite in it's probably one of those 3, UCLA, Michigan, or Ohio State. I mean, Michigan is down this year, but, Michigan's basketball history goes well back and all the way. Bill Frieder had some unbelievable teams. And, of course, Steve Fisher wins it all with Glenn Rice in that group. Then they get the Fab Five. Then beyond that, I mean, they've been to – John Beilein had them in the Final Four seemingly every year. It was unbelievable.
Well,
he would write them off.
I brought up the Fab Five because you said if you're like 60 years old.
Yeah. No, you're right. But what's funny is the Fab Five, understandably, the Fab Five is the one that brings you the most notoriety, right? The reality is that the Fab Five amongst the groups that have come through Michigan is the one that won the least. I mean, they went to Final Fours. They never won one. They lost the Big Ten title to Indiana twice.
Tennessee could be there.
Tennessee's a good one, especially right now. You don't think of it as a basketball school at all, right? But like they're pretty good in basketball, and obviously, Tennessee football is interesting to me because I still think of Tennessee football as like an elite blue blood.
Yeah, and
they've really fallen off, but I still think. I mean,
they've climbed back a little bit the last couple of years, but not to where they were.
But man, I'll tell you what, like Kevin Bowen went this year, as we talked about when they played Alabama. There is nothing like. I mean, that stadium at night
is
unbelievable. I mean, there's just the SEC in general, and I know that there's a bias against, people are like, they get tired of hearing about how great the SEC is, but the reality is that the SEC, who's a mid-pack SEC football program?
Arkansas.
Good one. Arkansas or South Carolina, right? You go into play at Arkansas or at South Carolina, and it is automatically one of the three most, like if Arkansas or South Carolina was in the Big Ten, their environment that you go into to play is one of immediately the three most hostile in the Big Ten. The SEC's, they're always playing night games. Everybody's drunk. They've been on moonshine since like 2 p.m. They're turning over couches and burning cars. It's a totally different animal, man. Like the tailgating aspect of the SEC, and I'm not one of these that's like, and I know people around here don't want to hear it because you get tired of hearing the SEC bias, but there is absolutely something about the SEC. It's why Alabama, as soon as Alabama showed any pulse whatsoever, they were going to pull them into the college football playoff because they're like, look, they went through the gauntlet of the SEC, and they're a huge moneymaker. And Alabama's going to beat Michigan. You know that, right?
Yeah.
I don't think Alabama should have gotten in, personally, based on resume and totality of resume. But it comes down to which was the college football committee's job. Was it to pick the 4 highest quality teams, the 4 best teams right now, or was it to pick the teams that put together the best resume over the course of the season?
Well, they got backed into a corner. They got backed into a corner with the Texas paradox.
Yeah.
Because you can't leave Texas off and include Alabama because they beat them.
Right.
And that unfortunately, among other things, wound up screwing Florida State. And it's a whole other reason why, if you're a college football fan, you should be amped up for the expansion to 12 next year.
I think, okay.
Before I open that door, I want to tell you, I know we'll get into this next week, but dream scenario is Bama, Washington, and then Michael Penix rides off into the sunset beating Bama. Would love nothing more than that. Unlikely that it happens, but love nothing more than that.
But what about Michigan? Why Bama over Michigan?
I mean, I'd take either or, but Bama, it feels like, they have the hardware to back it up.
They do.
Give me Bama.
Huh? We want Bama.
Well, I'm saying, why would you want him to beat Alabama more than you would want him to beat Michigan?
But for what I just said, yeah, the hardware matters. I mean, they're
because of the prestige of the program.
Yes,
okay.
They are the program of college football the last 17 years.
Indisputably, yeah, indisputably. Now, the Alabama, I know that we're bringing up an old wound here, but there's no doubt that Alabama probably is one of the 4 best teams, but at the same time, as impressive as their win was over Georgia, a week before that, they needed a miracle to beat a very average Auburn team. And in addition to that, if Alabama is in fact, everybody's like, well, they had to put Alabama in because everybody knows they're one of the best teams in the country. If they're one of the best teams in the country, then why did losing a close game to them penalize Georgia 4 spots when Georgia's been the creme de la creme for 30 games? You know what I mean? Now, back to the point about 12 teams, I don't disagree with you, Jimmy, that 12 is better than 4 for sure, but I will be honest, and this is beggar chooser, greedy on my behalf, but I think 12 is too many. I think 8 was the way to go. Because there is within 8, whoever is 8th, you still have like a legitimate, okay, that team can absolutely, like Oregon would be, what's Oregon right now? Probably 8, right?
Yeah. So your 12th team this year is Oklahoma. Before that, it's Ole Miss, Penn State, Missouri.
Yeah,
Oregon.
I mean, Ole Miss. I mean, is Ole Miss really putting the fear in anybody if they're going up against Washington or Texas or Michigan? Does anybody really think they're going to win? I mean, Oklahoma was okay, but they had the losses they lost. And how about Penn State? Is there any bigger paper tiger than Penn State every single year? Let me tell you Penn State's season every single year. Literally, I'm gonna do a favor to every sportscaster in whatever, Lehigh, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia State College.
We
Here
did
you
this
go.
exercise
you
when
ready?
they played OSU.
Here we go.
Yep.
The Penn State Nittany Lions went into Columbus, ranked, of course, number 4 in the country against the number 2 Buckeyes. And James Franklin's 7-0 Nittany Lions had the fans on the edge of their seat when they were leading in the horseshoe 10-3. At the half, Ohio State made adjustments, came back. Marvin Harrison Jr. got hot, and Ohio State defeated Penn State yesterday 38-6.
You think they're going to start doing this?
38-10.
You know what to do.
Oh, boy.
You think they'll start breaking out snapping now that he's there at Penn State?
I thought that died.
Every year, Penn State starts out 6 or 7-0 every year. They play Ohio State. They look good for a while. They lead like going into the third quarter. They're ups, and you get excited. You start getting excited, right? Then they get beat, and then 2 weeks later they go to Minnesota and get beat again, and they end up with 2 or 3 losses every single year.
Ryan Day's dealing with the same complex playing Michigan.
No, you're right.
Right, that narrative
Ryan
about
Day
Penn
is
State.
worried about becoming John Cooper Part 2, right?
Yeah.
No question about it. We don't have an HR or security department, do we?
No, he's lurking.
Yeah, I can tell.
I'm going to barricade the door?
Look at Derek Schultz. He's in for J&B. He's just awkwardly loitering.
He found a lull.
This clearly feels like. I mean, here's the thing. Derek managed to find the only person more awkward than him in the whole building, Elijah. This is like Lenny and Squiggy running around trying to pick up chicks.
I won't even deny it. It's true.
All right, Derek mercifully is going to talk to us, I guess, next.
You guys know how much I love golf, but just
of the day.
This is me, all right? I'm not an athlete. This is my way. This is how I win.
Today's plays of the day in college hoops will take Baylor on the money line at plus 136 on the, not on the road. It's a neutral site game in New York at MSG against the Duke Blue Devils. In the NBA, we will take the Boston Celtics to bounce back tonight. They're in Sacramento against the Kings. Pacers, Hornets, Tyrese Halliburton over 41.5 points plus assists. Pacers dominate tonight. They put up 130. I'm going over 128.5 for the Sirs tonight. Eddie, do you have anything?
Yeah, I've got 3 different bets I'm going to give you, all points related. I'll take Lauri Markkanen over 21.5 for the Utah Jazz, under 22.5 for Paolo Banchero. Magic are taking on I'll take Kobe White for the Bulls over 22.5.
Derek, did you get all that?
Tyrese Halliburton points and assists 41. I'm trying to think about that one. He's been struggle busing here a little bit.
If you threw in turnovers, that number increases a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, 3 turnovers. Isn't it weird that Halliburton's at a point where 3 turnovers is like, shocking. Whoa, like 3 turnovers?
He's had a few of them.
Well, he had a 7 turnover
egregious
game. Yeah, that was bad too. But
4 the other night.
And you don't want to lay it all on him. They're giving up $150 a night lately, but he's struggled for sure.
This stretch of 6 games before the calendar turns, as Eddie was highlighting yesterday, it's critical. Do you remember the stat, Eddie, for after the turn of the year?
23 to start the year are against playoff teams.
Wow. So you have to take care of Charlotte at home. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Not lose to them twice at home in the same season?
It's not a big ask, right?
No.
In the same month,
Washington shouldn't be a big ask, guys. And Washington is like
that was brutal, too.
A juggernaut. They've won 4 games this year.
Yeah. Brutal. I mean, at least they survived Detroit, who's lost 572 games in a row or whatever.
Derek, I'd like to know, did you get sleep last night? Are you nervous? Like, what are you doing?
I am so excited to be here, Jake. Thanks so much for saying that. Excited to be on the airwaves. Excited to be with my best bros, not only you, but also Jimmy and I, Yankees buds. Eddie and I were texting back and forth earlier today. It's mostly about the hotline number, but still I consider him a friend. I'm psyched. I'm ready to go. These things, the fill-in with J&V, like Todd Meyer always is texting me sometimes within 24 hours, hey, can you do this? So it's always like kind of spur of the moment.
It's because nobody else, they couldn't find anybody.
And I don't have time. Well, he always tells me I'm the first
You're like
one
the
that he
Isaiah
asks.
McKenzie of the roster.
I mean, you can ask John when he comes back, but I think John chooses me as the first reserve. I'm the first one off the bench for his show. And I'm happy to fill in whenever you're out.
You're like James Johnson.
So just let me know. I know that you guys have had James Boyd and people like that in here who are great, but I'm also willing and available.
You know how many days I take off, right?
Well, you have your trip with Byron.
Correct.
As long as he brings his wallet, and you guys can go all traverse across the country.
And the keys to the car.
And then you're basically out every Friday during IndyCar season.
No, not anymore.
Which is kind of a paid vacation. That doesn't happen anymore?
No.
Okay. These guys haven't seen your IndyCar W-2, right?
We got to work on that for 24, right?
One time when Jake and I were doing the show together, he printed out his IndyCar W-2, and it was like December. It was like this time, like 6-7 years ago. So it was the full year of the W-2. Like it was the year-end tax form, and it took me a while to really kind of make peace with what they were. I think Mr. Penske turned the faucet off for the most part, but it took me a while to make peace with what Tony George and everybody else were paying out in those days.
They know talent when they see it.
I could not believe it. I'm like, the guy is a turn reporter, for God's sake. Come on.
Okay, so you got a big show lined up, right?
Yeah, Julian Blackmon's going to join us 3:30. I'm excited about that. Had I don't know if you call it a game-sealing pick. There was still 4 or 5 minutes left, but certainly the kind of the interception that salted that game away against Pittsburgh. 4 o'clock, we'll have KB on. We'll talk about his trip to see Notre Dame lose by 20 points to the Citadel. And
you were
other
quick
Colts
to tweet that out last night.
I know. I felt bad doing it. And then I felt bad for Kevin and Greg's mentions.
You had a good subject tweet, and we're up against it. But when you said, what's the worst, that was a great thread that people have.
Did you see Caleb's response?
No.
Caleb said Colts Rams, and I'm like, Caleb, you live in Fishers. It's the worst loss that you traveled to. And he goes, traffic was really bad that day. I'm like, come on, man. Like, that's not the spirit of the question.
Not like when I drove all the way to see North Carolina State Clemson and walked in, and it was like 27-3 in the first quarter.
I remember
drove
that
660 miles.
Mark Monteith as well going to join us, and then John Chuckery, our old friend from Atlanta, 92.9 The Game, going to join us. We'll talk Falcons and Colts.
Have fun with it. My time with you is up.
Well, you have to come
Hey there, it's Jake Query from The Fan with some fantastic